when Islam comes into a place, they offer you a few choices. Convert, die, or live as a dhimmi, and you pay a jizya, which is a protection kind of poll tax. And there are all sorts of institutionalized mechanisms to remind you of where you stand in the hierarchy of the society. I've got an opportunity to brainwash these next generation of idiots. Let me use the pulpit to do that. And therefore, let me teach them that socialism is great. Let me teach them that whiteness is evil, that patriarchy, men are toxic, and so on. So then what do you expect the future generation of politicians to be? They're called Justin Trudeau.
If we're looking at universities, and in fact, if you've got children, yeah? If there's a parent here whose children are about to go to university, what advice would you give the kids? Because people, I always say now, parents used to be worried about their kids going to university and getting addicted to drugs or drinking too much alcohol. Yeah? Now I'd be worried about them coming out of university, chopping off their penis or removing their boobs. Yeah? Something big's gone on. Information covered up, censorship, corruption. The mainstream media have proven itself to be untrustworthy. I'm here to give a platform for debate, for truth, for open discussion. I'm introducing you to my podcast, Silenced with Tommy Robinson.
Who exactly is Tommy Robinson, or Stephen Gaxley-Lane?
With the English Defence League, the EDL.
Robinson has alarmed
The problem is with Islamic
The English far-right Islamophobic activists.
Since then, there's been organised protests across the country in London, Manchester, Leeds. People in their thousands are marching for Robinson's release.
There is no such thing in this country as a Muslim.
Free Tommy Robinson!
Welcome to my latest edition of my podcast, Silenced. I've travelled to Canada. The first city I've come to is Montreal to meet a certain gentleman who I've watched for years, I've respected. It's Gad Saad.
How you doing, Tommy? Nice
It's a pleasure to finally sit down with you.
Likewise.
So I'll just introduce you to my viewers, and I'd like to start at the beginning, Gad.
Sure.
Just to understand, I know you're an author, you're a professor, but where was you born?
So I was born in Lebanon.
Yep.
59 years ago now. I can't believe, I still feel like I'm 12 years old.
59, you look well, Gad.
Thank you. 1964, we were part of the last, we meaning my family, my community, we were part of the last remaining Jews in Lebanon. There was at one point a, not thriving, but a sizable minority of Jews in Lebanon, most of whom left during the 20th century as it became more difficult to be Jewish in the Middle East, but we were part of the last group that steadfastly refused to leave Lebanon. But then the Civil War broke out in 1975 when I was 11 years old. Well, it broke out when I was 10. And so we spent the first year of the Civil War in Lebanon, but then it really became untenable to be Jewish in Lebanon. And so we escaped and came to Montreal.
So people understand the Civil War in 75?
75, yeah.
Civil War, what was the demographics of Lebanon at that time?
So it would have been majority Christian, okay. Roughly, I think, probably around 60, 70%. So Lebanon was a Christian country. I mean, it has historically been referred to as the Paris of the Middle East and as tolerant and progressive. But you always have to contextualize those words in the context of the Middle East, right? In the Middle East, you're tolerated until you're not tolerated, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're no longer tolerated, you better put on some really good running shoes and run fast because they're coming for you. So you always had a sense that your time was limited, and that's why most of my extended family had left Lebanon.
Before the Civil War?
Before the Civil War.
Okay.
And so by the time the Civil War broke out, as you probably know, most butchery in the world is measured against the brutality of the Lebanese Civil War, because it was truly orgiastically brutal, because neighbors that had lived next to each other suddenly became mortal enemies. Much of the war was, some argue that it was based on politics, but of course it had a huge religious element. So the Christians were generally fighting against the Muslims, but even within the Muslims there were many different factions, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and many other militia groups. And there was really no place where the Jews can hide. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Yeah. So in Lebanon, you carry what's called in Arabic hawiyya. Hawiyya is an internal ID card.
Which has your religion on it.
Which has your religion on it. As a matter of fact, it's more important than your height or your weight or your eye color. it's the number. I mean, the prism by which everything is measured in Lebanon is which group do you belong to, which religious group. So if you were Jewish, it wasn't even so in Arabic. Jewish is Yahudi. It wasn't even written Yahudi, Jew. It was written Israeli, which means Israelite. So even in the context of the fact that you were Lebanese, were Arabics, that didn't matter. You were an Israelite. Now, why is that important? Because one of the ways that people got killed early in the war is that there'd be these random roadblocks, these militia roadblocks anywhere. So you're going to buy bread, there's a militia group that stops you, show us your Hawiyah, show us your papers. Well, there weren't many militia groups that you were going to clear if you had Israelite on it. So you couldn't really, so there was many ways that you could die. Snipers could kill you, bombs could kill you, people could knock on your door, the militia could kill you at the roadblock. And so if you were Jewish, you had to really lay low and be quiet and hopefully get out. And eventually, during that first year, we were able to escape to Montreal.
So people can understand, so what kicked off the Civil War? And was it just because, am I right that just all of a sudden roadblocks started getting set up?
So the catalyst, although there is the cancer is brewing before it all comes out, was I think there was an incident where there was a massacre of a bus that kind of led to the original breaking out of the war. But the writing was already on the wall. So for example, so I have 3 siblings. The next oldest is 10 years older than me. He's a judo champion, and you'll see in a second why I'm mentioning it, because people think that it just broke out the war, but all of the nastiness was already being laid, the foundation. So he was Lebanese champion for many years in a row.
Okay.
In judo. And then around 1973, so this is 2 years before the war broke out, he was visited by some men who explained to him that it was time for him to retire because it didn't look good for,
a Jew to be representing Lebanon.
And well, and also to be winning the Lebanese championship, especially in a combat sport, that doesn't look good, right? I mean, Jews should be submissive and meek, know your place, Jew. And so they basically told him that it was time for him to retire, lest there might be an accident that happens to him. And so he left and moved to...
Were they Christian or were they Muslim? The people that come to see him?
Muslim.
Muslim, okay.
Then my eldest brother, who lives now in Montreal, in 1974, he was courting, about to get married to a Palestinian Christian woman, which didn't go well either in her family, because she was marrying a Jew, and it didn't go well in my family, because he wasn't marrying a Jew.
Okay.
And so there was already a lot of conflict. They ended up eloping. Well, he was stopped at one of those roadblocks by PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, militiamen. This is before the Civil War. And when they stopped him, they said, "Oh boy, you've got a really beautiful watch here," meaning give it up. And he's like, "No, this is a watch that my mother gave me, no way." And so they look at his wife to be, I think they weren't married yet, blonde, and said, "Oh, she's really beautiful,
Give us the watch,
your blonde wife," right? And then he ended up moving to Montreal also before the Civil War. So yes, we can talk about...
But that's just your family, so just out of your 2 brothers,
Exactly.
That's happened to them. So what was happening across the board to the community?
So yes, we can point to a specific event that started the war, but all of those undercurrents were taking place. If you want, I can share a couple of Jew-hating stories that I went through. I actually discussed this in the first chapter of The Parasitic Mind, my 2020 book. So in the first time that at least I remember facing Jew hatred in Lebanon, Paris of the Middle East Lebanon, tolerant, progressive Lebanon, was in 1970, President Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the Egyptian president of Egypt. He was very, very popular across the Middle East and in the Arab world because he was a pan-Arabist, meaning he was trying to unite all of the Arabs into one cohesive force, of course in part to get rid of Israel and the Jew cancer and all this kind of stuff. Well, in 1970, he passed away. And as often happens in the Middle East, people take to the street to do these kind of lamentations and religious incantations and death to this and death to that. And as the crowd was proceeding down my street in Beirut, I was hearing death to Jews, death to Jews. And I turned to my mother, I said, "Well, why are they screaming death to Jews?" And she said, "Just keep your head down, be quiet." That was the first time that
And how old was you then? 5?
I'm 5.
Five,
I
yeah.
hadn't yet turned 6, so this is
Yeah.
1970. So that was one example. Another story that I tell, well, I told the judo story with my brother. By the way, just to complete that story, so my brother leaves to France because he can no longer compete in Beirut, in Lebanon. In 1976, the Montreal Olympics, happened in Montreal. He ended up representing Lebanon. So imagine, so the guy who was too Jewish to be the Lebanese champion ends up, we'll forgive the fact that you've got the terminal disease of being Jewish in 1976.
To fight in the Olympics.
To fight in the Olympics. So 1976, not too far from here, he actually competed. He lost in the first round, but nonetheless, he represented Lebanon. Here's two more quick stories. Story number 2, around 1974, so this is probably 6-8 months before the start of the Civil War. I'm sitting in my class and the teacher says, each of you stand up and tell us what you wish to be when you grow up. Person gets up, I want to be a soccer player, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a nurse, and a kid gets up who's a quote friend of mine who I've grown up with, says, when I grow up, I want to be a Jew killer, to the raucous applause and laughter of everybody. And by the way, I have...
How many Jews were in your class?
And there was one other Jew.
And the rest all Muslim or mixture?
No, mixture.
Mixture, okay, Christian Muslims.
Yeah, Christian Muslims.
Was this child who said this Muslim?
So I can't confirm, but I'm almost certain based on his name that he is.
Okay.
So yeah.
And how old are you then?
So I'm about 10,
okay.
Maybe 9.5. Story 3, which I'll tell the story as it happened in Lebanon, and then I'll close the loop as to what happened just here in Montreal after October 7th.
Okay.
So the day that we left Lebanon, by the way, we were accosted to the airport by Palestinian militia, whom my parents had paid money to get us to
you out,
because there was no way that you could clear the roadblocks that were around the Beirut International Airport that were controlled by the PLO if whoever was bringing you was not sympathetic. Like if they don't tell you, you can go through.
Yeah.
Now, of course, as you're being taken by these guys that are all wearing all the stuff that you see, the ISIS,
the jihadists.
I grew up in that world, and so those guys come over to our house to take us. Now, you don't know if when they're taking you,
they're going to turn on you.
They're going to take you in a ditch and put a bullet in your head. As a matter of fact, I remember.
So your mum and dad are taking a massive risk by doing that as well.
Exactly, but that's the only way out.
Otherwise, just
you roll the dice. You're either going to get a bullet in your head, or they're actually going to honor their thing. And luckily, they did honor it. But anyways, I remember when the guys came over to our house. The main guy, that what looked like the leader, was actually very sweet to me. And he saw that I was looking at the machine gun. No,
okay.
and he said, "Oh, do you want to hold it?" And I remember sort of holding the machine gun as a little boy.
How old was you at this point?
I just turned 11.
11, okay.
Yeah, I just turned 11. So we left end of October, and my birthday is in mid-October, so I just turned 11. So then, by the way, as we're driving to the airport, I'm about to tell a story of what happened when we flew out of Lebanon. But I have no memory from the time that they picked us up to when we flew out. And once I asked my parents, how come I don't recall that thing? And so they told me, and I truly have no memory of it, that as we were going through different neighborhoods in Beirut to get to the Beirut International Airport, we were taking fire from different, militia who were not sympathetic to the PLO, and they had like our suitcases on top of us in the car, and we were all, so it was so traumatic.
You might have fainted.
That I repressed it. So I have no recollection of that. The only recollection I have is them telling me that happened. So anyway, so we get to the airport, we take the flight out, and at one point, the captain says we are now out of Lebanese airspace, okay? And so my mother takes out, in the book I say it could have been a Star of David or it could have been a Chai, which is the Hebrew sign of life. But I'm almost certain it was a Star of David. she puts it around my neck and says, now you can wear this proudly and not hide your identity. Okay, so that gives you a sense of what Paris in the Middle East was, that even though you were tolerated, don't advertise that you're Jewish, because you never know who's going to come after you. Now, let's fast forward to around, I think it was October 21st. You could probably go and check, because the tweet is still up.
Okay.
So I was picked up, I was working on a laptop at a cafe, not far from where you and I met yesterday.
Okay.
And my wife picks me up, and she's with one of our children who had just played a soccer match in the east end of Montreal. And as I walk into the car, the first thing he says, Daddy, if you were wearing a Star of David where I just played soccer, you'd be dead. So and by the way, in the poetry of life is that he uttered those words at almost the identical age that I was in 1975. So in 1975, my mother puts a Star of David around me and says, you can now wear this proudly.
Your dad's
45 years later, my son says, if you wore that Star of David, you'd be dead. In Montreal, Canada, in the 21st century.
So that's where it's gone.
That's where it's gone.
When you left Lebanon, there was your mum, you, who else?
There was my mum, me, my sister had returned, so my two brothers were out.
Already gone?
One brother was already in Montreal, the one who with the watch and the blonde Christian Palestinian. The other one had lived in France and now was moving to join us in Montreal. My sister had also been sent out of Lebanon before the Civil War, because it's no place for a Jewish girl to grow up. She had come to Montreal to study at university, but had gone back to visit Beirut, and then got caught in the Lebanese Civil War. So as we left, it was me, my mother, my father, and if I remember correctly, my sister.
Your mother and father, were they born in Lebanon?
They were born in Lebanon.
So understanding, we can see how it's gone 45 years later to Canada, Montreal, but when your mum and dad were growing up in Lebanon, was it safe to be Jewish?
So it depends what safe is, right? Is it safe in the sense that there isn't a daily, pogrom and genocide of Jews? Yes. Can people find out that you're Jewish? Of course, because they just have to go to the synagogue on Saturday mornings and they would see who's there. But it's quote safe, right? It's, be quiet.
Yeah.
Certainly don't ever show allegiance to Israel. Don't ever speak about politics. Don't ever criticize the government. Know your place, Jew, right? So you are, and maybe your followers know this, the concept of a dhimmi.
Yep.
Okay. So
explain for the people that don't.
Right. So
I understand.
So in Islamic doctrine, dhimmi is not even a second-class citizen. It's a third-class citizen, a fourth-class citizen. When Islam comes into a place, they offer you a few choices: convert, die, or live as a dhimmi, and you pay a jizya, which is a protection kind of poll tax. And there are all sorts of institutionalized mechanisms to remind you of where you stand in the hierarchy of the society. You're a dhimmi, right? They refer to you as a kafir, a kuffar, an unbeliever. It's a kind of a dirty word, right? Now, that doesn't mean that on a daily basis people were spitting at you. My parents were well entrenched in Lebanese society. They had tons of friends who were Muslim and Christian. So I don't want to make it sound as though every day, you had tomatoes thrown at you. But you knew that your time was numbered. That's why my extended family had all left. That's why all of my siblings who were much older than me, my parents were clear that their future could not be in Lebanon. And that was before the Civil War broke out, right? So yes, it was dangerous in that I think my parents were smart enough to realize that we had no long-term future there. But by the way, it's so hard to extricate yourself from your background, in that even when we moved to Montreal, in the middle of the most brutal civil war, my parents then kept returning to Lebanon. And many people would say, well, how
were you going back to?
How could you go back to civil war? How could you've emigrated, you've left, by the skin of your teeth? Well, it's because they came here, they're already in their 40s. They hate it here. It's cold here.
Did they ever bring you back as children?
I never went back.
No, okay, so they've made decisions to go back.
As a matter of fact, from when we emigrated at the end of 1975 till 1980, a large chunk of that time period, I was only growing up with the judo brother, because the other brother was married. The sister had then gotten also married. So in our first home in Montreal, it was just me and the judo player who was 10 years older than me. He's busy, he's going to university, he's still training for judo. So I was basically raised by the wolves, okay, by the street. So thank God I came out okay. On one of their return trips to Lebanon in 1980, my parents were kidnapped by Fatah. And it was that event that then resulted in them never returning. So they were kidnapped, some really bad things happened to them.
What sort of bad things? Do you want me asking?
Tortured. My father had a massive beating with a rifle here that caused a temporary paralysis. Like, you know, when you get a stroke,
your
whole
face
face
drops.
is right. So he had that for a while. My mother, so I'm not even sure if I've ever mentioned this publicly, so you might be getting an exclusive here.
Was anything sexual?
Right, so I was 15 at the time, and I remember that
You're here on your own. Your mum and dad are in...
I'm here with my
your brother, but your mum and dad are out there, and how do you find out they've been kidnapped?
Well, actually, I talk about this in the Parasitic Mind. A friend of mine, whom we call my cousin, but he's not a biological cousin, but my parents and his parents were very close friends. He went to the same high school as me. Now, he had found out through the Lebanese network that my parents had been kidnapped, but my siblings had kept that hidden from me.
From you, to stop you worrying.
Right, and so he would see me at school laughing and being...
And thinking,
this guy is pretty cold, he's pretty callous to be so laissez-faire nonchalant about his parents. I didn't know that my parents were kidnapped. I knew that there was a lot of hectic stuff happening in the house, and there was a lot of stress because my siblings were coming, they were phone, and they told me some BS story about, oh, they lost money, we're trying to, whatever, some just to not get me worried. I only found out the full story when my parents were rescued, and then they came back to Montreal. They were, I think, in captivity for 8 days in total. Now, regarding the sexual stuff, when I did find out the story, and I was 15 years old, as you would expect from an evolutionary perspective, which we might end up talking about, my first concern as a male was, did they do anything to my mother? And I remember I asked her that. She kind of hesitated, and then just said, she said no, but I've never known if it was a lie or not. But she said that they threatened her, that they would do certain things to threaten that the gang rape was coming. I won't get into the details. But I've always wondered whether she lied to me or didn't lie to me. So I don't know, and I never brought it up again. But I remember as a 15-year-old, I thought that if she says that it's yes, I would spend the rest of my life hunting down those guys. But she told me no.
So she was kidnapped by Fatah.
Fatah.
And you've talked about the PLO. To people who don't know who the PLO are, who are the PLO?
So the PLO is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Their head was Yasser Arafat, so the background to some of this story of the kidnapping was, so my mother's best, and I'll come back to the PLO in a second. My mother's best friend was a Syrian woman, a Muslim woman. Her name was Ihsan. She was the personal dresser of Hafiz al-Assad. Hafiz al-Assad was the president of Syria. His son now, Bashar al-Assad, is the current president.
Okay.
The way it works in Lebanon, everything is through connections, right? If you don't have connections, I mean, you're dead. So what my siblings were doing through all their networks is trying to work the network to find out where mom and dad are.
Who had them?
So through Ihsan, she she speaks to Hafiz al-Assad, who then, the most likely kidnappers would have probably been some faction of Palestinian militia. So then Yasser Arafat tells her, well, I don't know if they're with one of our groups, I can find out, but hopefully they're not with Abu Nidal's group, because at that time there was a power struggle between Abu Nidal, who was leading Fatah, and Yasser Arafat, and they were with that group. Now, during the captivity, one of the things that they were, well, the main thing that they were trying to get them to do, and torturing them and so on, is to get them to sign that they are Israeli spies.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, luckily, well, they're not Israeli spies, but they never said, yeah, okay, fine, we'll sign it, because then that would have given them the, the legal, I mean, not that there's anything legal.
Justification.
Yeah, to just execute them. And it turns out, and I don't think I've ever, you're getting a lot of scoops today. So one story that I had heard after the fact was that, so as you know, in the 7 deadly sins, one of the deadly sins is greed. And so this one story I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it's pretty authenticated, is that, so my dad had a store, my mother had a store, and my dad had a store in separate areas. My mother was closer to the Jewish quarter. My dad was in another area called Hamra. And the owner of that building wanted my dad to sell him off his store, which hadn't yet been liquidated. My parents had kept it. That's why they kept going back to Lebanon even.
Oh, they kept the business even when they come in?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so apparently he concocted this whole kidnapping
to get the business,
to then get the business. So
piracy.
Yeah. So that's what I had heard at times. Yeah. Okay.
And when you said your parents were rescued, who rescued them?
Well, rescue just means that there was a money exchange,
okay.
And then you can have them back. Now, the reality is, I don't know if you can appreciate, in Lebanon, at the time, your life wasn't worth the price of the bullet that will put in your head. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they even survived for that many days, usually when you're kidnapped,
you're gone.
You're gone. You're never seen again. And actually, what led to the original thing of my dad being beaten is that as they came to their apartment, there were militia guys waiting for them, saying, "Come with us." And my father realized that meant that they were about to be executed. So he starts pleading with them, and he's holding on to the railing of the stairs of the apartment building, and to try to get him to, let go, they started smashing him. So it was truly miraculous that they, ever came out. So after that, no one's gone back. I've been invited many, many times. Once, I became a known person. Come back, you'll be in the Prime Minister's thing, you'll be protected, we love you, blah, blah. And I said, hey, I'm not
taking that risk.
I'm never taking that
What was the
risk.
results of the civil war?
Nothing really.
Who controls it now? Lebanon?
Well, so Lebanon, the demographic reality is that it's completely flipped. Now it is a majority Islamic country. So the exact numbers I'm not sure, but it's probably now 65-70% Islamic. Okay. Of course, Hezbollah is in control in most areas, but demography is truly destiny, right? And that's one of the things that I've been, and so have you, been warning people in the West, is that it's just a numbers game. And so in Lebanon, you would have never thought that it could ever be anything other than a Christian country. Well, it is no longer a Christian country. What happened to the Syrian Christians? What happened to the Iraqi Christians? What happened to the Coptic Christians of Egypt? Egypt used to be completely Coptic. So it's only a matter of time that you have the reverse happening. Sometimes it takes 2 minutes for us to Islamize a society. Sometimes it takes 2 years. Sometimes it takes 200 years. But once that trend starts, inshallah, it will eventually be 100% Islamic.
And is that the trend you see happening now for the West?
Yes. I'm speaking to a guy who's been warning Europe. Yeah. It's absolutely unbelievable, right? So let me contextualize. We moved here at the end of 75. From 1975 to about 1998, And the reason why I remember the date is because it's episodic memory, because the first time that I saw a veiled woman in Montreal. So I went from 1975 to 1998 without ever seeing a veiled woman.
Okay.
As a matter of fact,
23 years, nothing.
yeah, nothing, zero. Islam was in my rear view mirror. Then I started seeing. Then I started seeing more. Then I started seeing more. Well, now I can walk out of my house, and out of the first 50 women I see, 25 of them will be veiled. So we've gone from I didn't see a veiled woman for 23 years to now it's everywhere. It's normalized everywhere. Now, someone will say, oh, but it's just a garment. It's just, what do you care? It's just an exotic, it's just yeah, sure. If you're an idiot, you think that, right? Islam doesn't tolerate others once it becomes in the majority. Does that mean that every Muslim is a horrible person? Of course not. Does it mean that most are lovely? Absolutely. Do I have tons of Muslim friends and fans? Absolutely. We're talking about the ideology. Does Islam tolerate others once it's in the majority? Well, there is this thing called 1400 years of data that can answer that question for us. And the answer is rather unequivocal.
So why do you think anyone like our country's leaders, who have got 1400 years of history to look at, where there's no success story ever, why do you think they can't work this out?
That's why I wrote The Parasitic Mind, right? So let me explain what that book is about, and then I'll be able to answer that question. So in the animal kingdom, there's a field called parasitology. Parasitology is the study of parasites. In the animal kingdom, there are all sorts of parasites that can get a hold of its host. So let's say a tapeworm gets into your intestinal tract and it feeds off you. A neuroparasite is a parasite that wants to go to your brain, alter your circuitry to suit its interests. So for example, a wood cricket, once it is parasitized by a hairworm, brainworm, the hairworm needs the wood cricket to jump into water in order for it to complete its reproductive cycle. The wood cricket detests water. It hates, it abhors water. But once its brain is parasitized, it becomes zombified. So it merely jumps to its suicide in the service of its parasitic...
What's inside it?
What's inside it, right? So I argued in The Parasitic Mind that human beings can be parasitized by ideological brainworms, right? So in the same way that we can be parasitized by actual physical brainworms, and humans can be parasitized by actual brainworms, we can be parasitized by postmodernism, cultural relativism, social constructivism, radical feminism, identity politics, diversity, inclusion, equity, and many others. And each of these were spawned on university campuses. I say this regrettably as a professor. It takes academics to come up with some of the dumbest ideas. And then these ideas end up parasitizing our political class, who originally come from the universities. And so a roundabout way to answering your question is that our Western politicians have had this perfect cocktail of parasitic ideas that causes them to reject that 1400 years of data, which, by the way, so in my next book called Suicidal Empathy.
Next book that's not out yet?
That's not out yet.
Okay.
I've only written about 1,000 words of it.
Okay.
So in that book, I basically argue that empathy is a wonderful emotion to hold. As a social species, it makes perfect sense that we've evolved empathy. If I exhibit empathy towards you, hopefully you'll reciprocate that empathy at some future time. So it's a way for us to oil our relationship. It's great. The problem with any emotion is that at times it can misfire, right? It can become hyperactive. It can target the wrong folks for empathy, right? It makes sense that you and I are more empathetic towards our biological children than to random children. That doesn't make us evil. It makes us evolutionary beings that recognize that our children are more important. Why? Well, because they are the vehicle of our immortality. They are literally half our genes are invested in our children. So I'm going to jump and in front of a truck to save my child more than I am a random kid in Liberia. Not because I'm a callous, mean person, but because my mind has evolved to actually be able to distinguish between where I should met my investment. So now our Western leaders have decided, because of this cocktail of parasitic ideas, that it is simply evil that we close our wonderful societies to folks from the outside. They too deserve the opportunity to benefit from the West. Now, in some small way, that's absolutely true. If you want to come to the West and you want to leave at the door all of the cultural and religious values that might be incongruent with our Western values, then come in, my brother, and hopefully we can make even a better society with you in it. But if you want to come into the West and you then want to impose your values once you become strong enough to do so, well, then a 3-day-old pigeon should be able to predict where that's going to go. Well, because of these parasitic ideas, because of suicidal empathy, our Western leaders are the happy, merrily wood cricket jumping into the water in the service of the hero.
Nice analogy.
You like it, huh?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
That's why I'm got sound.
Okay, let's rewind a bit. So you come here at 10, 11, you come from a war zone,
Yes.
You're in a war zone for a year, you're escaping, maybe going to death at that time, you land in Canada. What's it like when you land in Canada for a young Jewish kid from Lebanon?
It's great. So I remember as I was being driven to my first day to elementary school, so this is, I think we arrived, if I'm not mistaken, October 31st, 1975. So it must have been early November that I finally got to elementary school. I saw this weird thing falling, snow.
Which you've never seen.
The boy from Lebanon doesn't see snow, although in the mountains of Lebanon there is snow, but you know, we're in the city where today's weather in Montreal would be considered a cold day in Lebanon. And so I'm like, what the hell is this? But then I remember thinking, well, it's better that these white things fall on me than the bombs, the bullets. And so in a sense, I felt safe. So the first thing I felt is, my God, this is a cold, dreary place. And I remember the first day that I went into class, actually our teacher's name was Mrs. Madame Abu Isa, who, she was like, I escaped Lebanon, I come here, and the first person is actually an Arabic name. And so she asks me to get up to introduce myself to the class. I didn't speak English. This was an English elementary school.
Okay.
I spoke, Arabic is my mother tongue, but I also spoke French.
Well, you spoke French when you was in Lebanon?
Yeah, because Lebanon at one point was a French protectorate. So the upper classes and so on, when you went to school, you typically learned, well, Arabic and French. So everybody spoke French.
Is that why you come to Montreal?
Exactly. So there were two reasons why we came to Montreal. We had an aunt. We had a maternal aunt, my mother's sister, that had immigrated, I think around 1970 or late 60s, with her husband, who was a prominent physician, who later became the Director General of the Montreal Jewish Hospital. And so because we already had an aunt here, and Montreal was French speaking, my parents thought, okay, well, let's move to Montreal. And at the time, maybe today as well, it was easier to get, refugee papers in Canada than it would have been in the US. My father was actually quite keen on moving to Israel, but he lost that debate with my mother because my mother was not very keen on having all her children end up serving in the military, and especially the 11-year-old who certainly would have been next in line. And interestingly, when she ended up winning that debate, I remember in 1982, Israel went into Lebanon to clear out some of the nasty guys. Well, had my father won that
you'd have been in there.
The first guy in there, I would have been the absolute. So I am the Lebanese guy who only left 7 years ago. I'm in my first year of military service because in 1982, I would have been 17 going on 18. And I'm Arabic speaker who's going into Lebanon. So it would have been me. I would have been the guy. So anyway, I get to that elementary school and the teacher asks me to stand up and introduce myself. I didn't speak English, so I said, you know, my name. I mean, I said it in French. My name is Gad Saad, and I come from Lebanon. Je m'appelle Gad Saad et je viens du Liban. And so kids were like, what? Because a lot of them are English only. Although you would think that Montreal is a bilingual city. And so then I said Liban, and I went like this to make like a shujik, to gesture for them to know Liban.
Well, for Lebanon.
Right.
Yeah, for the war.
And incredibly, a few years ago, I was at the time, my daughter's elementary school barbecue, end of year.
Yep.
And a guy came up.
From your class?
From that class and said, I remember you. Exactly. And you know, we didn't grow up with cell phones and that. So your documented history only lives in your memory and in anybody else who shared that experience. So in him saying that story, that was the cell phone showing.
Yeah.
He's like, I remember you the first day, and I'm like, oh my God, it gave me goosebumps. So anyway, so then I very, very quickly settled into my life in Lebanon. You know, children are very malleable. They have great plasticity. It doesn't, you know, you go from worrying about dying every second to worrying about whether you're going to make the soccer team. Although I wasn't worried about that because I was a very good soccer player.
Was you welcomed in?
I was welcomed.
With all the other kids?
All the other children. I think one of the things that really, as a slight tangent, one of the things that I think either makes your elementary school and high school years very painless or very painful is your athletic ability, right?
Yeah, if you're good at the football team, you've got mates.
I mean, you're the guy. And so I was really very good at soccer. And so I didn't, you know, I wasn't.
You become popular.
And I was popular, and you know, I was a friendly kid. Incredibly, in the last year, I mean, it's so funny because you must be a great host because I'm telling a lot of stories that I've never told before. The last year of my elementary school, the teacher that we had, I don't know if she would care that I said her name. Anyways, I remember her very well because I think a lot of the boys had a little bit of a crush on her, a 12, 13-year-old boy crush.
Did you?
I thought she was very attractive.
A lot of the boys, you mean you did?
Yeah. Very good. I think you're the psychologist, not me. So this would be 1977 now, my last year of elementary school. This was about 3 years ago, so calculate the math. 40-some years later, I receive an email. Guess who it's from?
From the teacher?
From that teacher.
Same one.
I recently saw you, whatever, I don't know if you remember me, I was your thing. So it was during COVID, so then she said, well, we can't meet now, but maybe would you be open to meeting for a coffee? And so actually where we had our latte yesterday.
You met her?
I met her, and actually my wife came. I can't remember how many of our children came, but I met that teacher. So
she's obviously seen you on TV.
She must have
seen you blown up
exactly.
and gone, Gad Saad.
Exactly. I know this kid.
I know this kid, yeah.
And so I actually asked her, I said, how, because again, you don't have the cell phone, so your memories are either in your head or through the eyes of someone else. She said, oh, I remember you, you were a very, fun, you were a very good student, you were always funny and so on. And so in a sense, your personality is your personality. So the guy that she described as a 12-year-old boy was exactly the guy that I am today. So I sometimes have a hard time believing I'm in my 50s. I still think I'm a 12-year-old boy. So life was good here. It was fine. I got into soccer. I was doing well in school. The first couple of years were tough, as I mentioned, because my parents kept going back to Lebanon. So I didn't have really too much parental guidance. But then in 1980, they returned permanently, which actually caused a bit of friction because then they wanted to assume the parental role, and I had a bit of...
You were rebelling against it.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, I didn't need you to tell me to do my homework all the years you were back in Lebanon.
Did you do your homework? Was you still do? Was you still?
I was a very conscientious guy. I was.
So you were still you was on it on your studies.
Yeah.
Okay. They were lucky then, your parents, because you could have gone off the rails.
I could have, and believe me, I had people in that group who, you know, were pretty rough. I mean, not rough Detroit, Michigan, but, you know, that I could have easily veered into the wrong directions. I never took drugs. I never smoked. I would, you know, I mean, I was a joker. I would do little silly things, but I stayed on the narrow path, and here we are many years later with Tommy Robinson.
Not on the straight path. So you've got, when you come out of school, you said if you were academic, what did you want to be when you were leaving school?
Yeah, so there were only two things that I'd ever been interested in being, and I thought for sure both would happen. From a very, very young age, I wanted to be a professional soccer player, and I wanted to be a professor. In a sense, if I can...
They're two very different things.
Two very different
things.
I'm fortunate enough to have been the rare unicorn who had both the brawn and the brains, right? I had both the athletic ability and was also very academically oriented, which also, by the way, allowed me to be popular and so on. I think had I been only academically oriented, then I would have been with the nerd geek types. But once you do the things that you can do on the soccer field, then suddenly all the girls think you're the hot guy, right? So I wanted to be a soccer player. I thought that I would pursue my academic career once my soccer career finished. I faced a few difficulties. Number one, in the late 70s and early 80s, being a big soccer player in Montreal, Canada did not afford you many opportunities.
Okay.
There were some opportunities to head off to Europe.
How good was you then?
So I got up to the under 18 national program. So I made the Quebec team. So I don't know if we have 10 provinces in Canada.
Okay.
So one of the provinces is Quebec. So making the under 18 Quebec now. Quebec likes to consider itself as an independent nation within a nation. So in that sense, it would be like being capped.
Okay, for the
national
side.
under 18.
Okay.
I had won many championships. So my club was Quebec champion. My club had gone to the Canadian Championship. I was vice champion of Canada with the Quebec team. So I had gone to a national training camp for the under 18s. But then there was a tournament. So my club had won the Quebec Championship, so we were the Quebec champions. We were going for the Eastern Canadian Championship, and in that tournament in Burlington, Ontario, which is about 5-6 hours away, I had a devastating career-ending injury. You would know because you understand soccer. I had a guy come from behind me and do a scissors tackle, and it caught my leg and just destroyed my leg. And so when the surgeon was going to try to fix it, and I asked him, you know, when do you think I can play again? He had said, oh, never mind playing. I'm not sure if you'll ever walk without a limp, right? And so because of that, because I was growing up in Canada, because I didn't have the family environment that supported those kinds of dreams. So for all sorts of dynamics, I really, you know, I didn't have Messi's father saying, sure, we'll all move to Barcelona and put all our chips on you. And so I had, you know, I remember, by the way, the first time that I visited Israel in 1983, I would play soccer everywhere. And at one point, I met a bunch of British guys, two of whom recently wrote to me. This is 1983. This is 41 years ago. So I was playing with a bunch of British guys.
How old were you in 1983?
83, I was exactly 18.
Okay.
They saw me play, and they said, why aren't you at some, you know, first division club in England? I mean, you're better than almost anybody that we've ever seen. And they were British guys who knew their soccer. And when I was 15, I had a guy who was Scottish watch me actually score a goal not too far from where you and I met, who said, I can make calls right now and send you to be an apprentice with Celtic tomorrow morning. But because I grew up in that environment where I didn't have the good family backing, because I'm in Canada, because of my injury, that dream ended. And so the highest I got was really under 18. I mean, I played after baloney stuff.
Yeah.
Tournaments with my university and so on, but nothing serious. Yeah. And so then my career was over, and so I just then laid into academia fully, and I ended up
Which you did what? What did you first study? When
So
you
my
went to
first,
university?
my undergraduate, my bachelor's degree was in about as technical and theoretical field as you can get, mathematics and computer science.
Okay.
And the idea there was, well, first I was very good in mathematics, but I thought if I'm going to be an academic, irrespective of which field I end up being an academic in, it's good to have the first degree be the hardest possible. Because in the same way that athletes will do sit-ups, even though they're soccer players, they're not kicking the ball with their abs, but you need to have your whole body be in shape. I needed this guy to be in shape so that whatever I ended up studying later
Comes easier.
comes easy. And by the way, many of the top academic psychologists all have a mathematics background because it trains you to be an analytical thinker, right? So my undergrad was in mathematics and computer science. Then I went on and I did an MBA with a mini thesis in operations research, which is again an applied mathematics field. Then both of these degrees, so my undergrad and my MBA was at McGill University, which
is where?
is here in Montreal.
Okay.
It's historically is the #1 school in Canada and usually has been in the top 20 universities in the world. It's known as the Harvard of the North.
Okay.
It is today known for its now many months of noble Palestinian encampment on campus. That's what it's known for now. So if you go, it's not far from here, McGill.
No, they've got the encampment.
They have the massive.
Yeah.
That's at McGill now.
So when you was at university all those years ago,
Yeah.
was there any wokeness in the university when you?
No, not undergrad, not MBA, but we're gonna come to that by my second master's, my Master's of Science and my PhD, and there you start seeing a tiny bit of it. So I'll get to it. So my undergrad and my MBA were at McGill. Straight after my MBA, I went to Cornell University, which is one of the Ivy League universities in the United States. The goal there was to be a mathematical modeler, meaning to apply mathematics to study human behavior. So I would join my quantitative background in trying to understand, how people make economic decisions and so on. But when I got to Cornell, I hooked up with a professor who eventually became my doctoral supervisor. His name is Jay Russo, who's a very well-known cognitive psychologist.
What's that mean?
Cognitive psychologist is somebody who studies cognition. How does the brain think? How is memory structured? How do you make decisions? Okay. So, and his specialty was behavioral decision making. How do people actually make decisions? How do you choose between cars? How do you choose between political candidates? How do you go through information when you're choosing? He didn't do mate choice, but I ended up studying how do we choose our mates. And so I quickly veered from wanting to be a applied mathematical guy to actually becoming a behavioral scientist. And so then all of my training at Cornell was largely in psychology and cognitive studies and so on. And so my doctoral dissertation, so there I got an MS, a Master's of Science, and a PhD. My doctoral dissertation, without boring your audience too much, was when is it that we know that we've acquired enough information to stop and make a choice? And so I think that's pretty easy to understand the jump. So imagine I'm choosing between a bunch of political candidates. Who am I going to vote for? Yeah. Well, there's an infinite amount of information I could look on them. Or I'm choosing between cars, or I'm choosing between girls to potentially marry. I don't end up looking at all of the possible information. I look at enough information so that at one point I say, you know what, I'm ready to buy the Mazda, right? So what I studied in my PhD is the stopping decision. And the stopping meaning I stopped acquiring additional information and I'm now convinced I'm buying the Mazda. I'm now convinced I'm voting Donald Trump. I'm now convinced I'm married. So I studied what are called the stopping decisions in sequential choice, which is an area of decision making, okay? Very, very technical area, very fancy cognitive psychology experiments and so on. The goal was to then apply it in consumer behavior. How do consumers make choices, okay? And that's why I'm housed in a business school, okay? But in the process of doing my PhD, in the first semester of my PhD, I was taking an advanced social psychology course with a professor by the name of Dennis Regan. And about halfway through the semester, he assigned a book to the class.
A what? A book. He signed what? A book.
A book, which I'll
Okay.
discuss what it is, which would end up completely altering my academic career. The book was titled Homicide, which is murder. It was by two evolutionary psychologists, and I'll explain in a second what that means.
What it means.
It was a book looking at patterns of criminality across cultures, across time periods, and then demonstrating that there are certain universal principles that explain why these crimes happen in their form. And so they were applying this evolutionary lens, which I'll explain, to study criminality. And so I had my eureka moment. I said, okay, I'm going to apply evolutionary theory to study human behavior in general and economic and consumer behavior in particular. So I ended up founding the field of evolutionary consumer behavior, applying evolutionary biology to study consumer behavior. But can I go back and
Yeah, of course, go on.
So what would be examples of patterns of criminality that would fit under an evolutionary framework? Okay, so I'll give you two examples. And I'll not put you on the spot, but I wonder what you're going to say. So what do you think is the number one predictor of there being child abuse in a home?
If the parent was a victim.
Right, okay. So then when I lecture about this in class, I will go to the board and I will list all of the explanations. So one would be father was a victim. Two might be alcoholic in the home. Three might be wrong side of the track. And all of these might have some predictive value in predicting the likelihood of there being child abuse. What if I told you that the actual reason is 100-fold more predictive than any reason that you'll come up with? Now, just to contextualize what 100-fold means, usually in science, let's say you're checking the efficacy of a drug.
Yep.
If the efficacy of the drug versus a placebo effect is 1.2, it means that it's 20% higher efficacy. So 1 to 1.2. This effect that I'm about to talk about is 1 to 100. So it's orders of magnitude greater than anything you typically see when you're doing science.
Okay.
Having said that, you want to revise what you think that one factor is? And by the way, if you don't get it, don't feel bad. Almost nobody gets it. Once I will tell you it, you'll go, oh my God, yes.
The one thing that makes it 100 times more likely that they're going to be abusive towards a child.
Yeah.
If they follow Islam. Sorry, no.
Tommy said it. Tommy said it. Not me. Target your hate to him.
If their name's Mohammed. No.
Okay, so you ready?
Yeah, go on.
If there's a step parent in the home.
Because it's not his kid.
There you go. So that increase.
So of course, because the own father's not going to abuse the own child, it's very unlikely, even if they're an abuser, that's less likely. So there's going to be if there's a stepdad.
Now, that has become known in the literature, in the scientific literature, as the Cinderella effect. Because the story of Cinderella, which is a universal fable, the stepmother is not dispositionally evil across all her children.
Just the stepchild.
Just the stepchild. She loves her biological children, can't stand her stepdaughter. Now, you can show that in many animal species other than humans, you have the exact same phenomenon. So for example, if you take a lion's pride, well, here's the dynamic that happens. Usually the lion pride is held together by one or two dominant males. They kick out all the other males who were sired by them once they become sexually mature. So then there are all these young, frustrated young males floating around in nature are going to identify a pride, go and test the resolve of the dominant males. Usually they're too young to put up a fight against the big males.
Yep.
But eventually, Father Time catches up to the males. Those dominant males are then given one of two choices: either leave peacefully, not unlike Islam, leave peacefully or suffer the consequences. It ends up finishing very badly for those males, whether they are killed by the young bucks or whether they go out into the wild.
And they're on their own.
They're all alone and they die emaciated and so on. What do you think when the new incoming males come into the pride is the first act that they do?
What do I think the first act when the new incoming come into the pride?
Linking it back
To the father, to the stepfather thing.
exactly.
Is to abuse them.
Is that they systematically kill all the cubs. So why? Because in the lion pride, males do invest in their cubs, unlike other feline species where the males only do a copulation. They just have sex and then they disappear, never to be heard. In the male pride, it's a social species where the males do invest in their pride and in their kids. Therefore, it doesn't make evolutionary sense for a male to evolve the ability to just invest in kids that are not his. So therefore, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kill off all the cubs.
They're mine.
They're not mine. The females, by the way, are not very happy about that. So they put up, I mean, female lionesses are no slouches. They do a lot more work than the males. They will put up a fight. Eventually, they lose that fight. The first thing that they do after those new males have killed all of their children, you know what it is?
Well,
They suddenly go into estrus, meaning they become sexually receptive.
to the one who's killed all the...
To the ones who's killed. So I always joke with my students when I'm teaching them about all of these dynamics. I say, you know, in the human context, we bring flowers and chocolates and we play Barry White music. In the lion context, I get you in the mood by killing your children. Okay? Now, why am I telling this whole story? Because there are many, many examples, including in the human case, where if you have heavy investment by both parents, they're not very keen on investing in children who are not theirs. Okay?
Yep.
So that was the first aha moment. Wow, this is so powerful as an explanation. The second one, this one might be a bit easier for you to predict. Who do you think across the world, you can go to an Amazonian tribe in the Amazonian jungle, who do you think is the singular most dangerous person in a woman's life? Is it?
Who do I think is the most dangerous person in a woman's life?
Yeah, so it could be in a tribe in Africa, it could be in the Amazon, it could be...
Who's the biggest danger to her?
Yeah. Can you guess? Is it a serial killer hiding in the bushes trying to rape you? Who is it? Once I say it, you're gonna get it.
Go on.
It's her long-term partner. It's her husband.
And that's the same for everyone. So the biggest threat to any woman is her husband.
Yeah. And now, okay, so that once we've established that,
Yep.
what is the main reason that men will typically go into a homicidal rage towards their women?
Jealousy.
Jealousy. So either because of realized infidelity or suspected infidelity, that will drive men
To
insane, right?
Yep.
Now, why would you have evolved that trait? Because in the human context, we are a biparental species, meaning both men and women do invest heavily in their children. Therefore, men are not going to be, your ancestors and mine are not those who said, oh yes, sweetie, go ahead and have sex with 20 guys, and I'll be happy to raise those children on behalf of Tony, the sexy gardener. Therefore, we've evolved the emotional, the cognitive, and the behavioral system to not react well to philandering.
To betrayal.
Women. Now, by the way, people mistakenly think that when you offer a scientific explanation for domestic violence, you're justifying it, you're condoning it. But only imbeciles think like that, because I usually retort when somebody says that, oh right, so when an oncologist who studies cancer gives you the explanation for cancer, he's for cancer, he's pro-cancer, he's justifying.
And this is all factual and backed up anyway, because if you're looking at the most,
it's
most
backed
attacks
up
come from the
through
husband.
culture, through time period. That's the beauty of evolutionary. So when I saw the explanatory power of evolutionary psychology, I said, that's what I'm going to do with my career. And so much of my academic career has been spent applying those evolutionary principles to study human behavior in general. It could be mate choice, it could be gift giving, it could be whatever. And so my scientific research is all over the place, but what unites it is always a commitment to applying evolutionary theory to understand why you do the things that you do.
Why people make their decisions.
Yeah.
And then you've how many years studying? How many years studying?
So the total in university is 10.
You've done 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
Wow.
So I got in at around 18, 19, and I finished at, actually, tomorrow, June 21st, 1994, I switched from Mr. to Doctor. I defended my doctoral dissertation June 21st, 1994.
And then went on to straight away teach.
Straight away, I got a professorship, which is quite...
And how old are you then? So you're
29.
You're 29.
I'm 29.
So you've studied till you're 29. What's that like studying till you're 29? Because you're a student till you're 29.
I was a student till I was 29.
Single?
I mean, the only job I had, like a substantive job, was as a research assistant. So throughout my education, I would get these research assistantship.
That pay.
And so, for example, when I went to Cornell, I was fortunate enough, because of my academic record, my tuition was paid.
Sponsored.
I got a doctoral fellowship.
Okay.
And so I got the full support. I didn't have to because as you probably know, the cost, the tuition to go to these elite, certainly private universities, prestigious universities in the US, will bankrupt you. And so I was lucky enough that...
You got sponsorship because of your intelligence.
Yeah.
Because of your grades.
Yeah. So I spent 10 years. So when I started at 29 as a professor, so I didn't have all the white hair. I looked very, very young. So when I would walk into class, so the undergraduate...
People think you're a student.
Exactly. So
okay.
Here's what I've done of course, I can't do it today. Yeah, so I would come to class, I would sit amongst the students, and I would say, so this is, what is this? This is consumer psychology? Yeah. What did you guys hear about this, the professor in this class? I don't know, I haven't heard much about it. I said, well, I heard he's kind of an ass, no? No, I didn't hear anything. So I would talk, then I would get up,
stand in front of the class,
and I would just smile at the person, and they're like, oh, what an asshole. But now, of course, that window's gone, because I can't pull off being a student anymore,
And was you single up to 29? I
was single. Actually, one of the reasons why I came back to Montreal is at the time I was single. I had gotten a few other possible offers, but the most concrete competing offer to Montreal was a professorship in a city in New York State that did not seem very appealing to me as a single guy. So it became a lot easier to simply...
Why not?
It had all, it was in, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter mentioning it now, it's 30 years later. It was in Rochester, New York.
Okay.
Rochester is kind of a gritty, blue-collar town, so it's got all the problems of a city, but none of its cosmopolitan benefits.
And the bonuses.
It's not London. London might have problems, but it's London. Montreal might have problems, but it's Montreal. So it's a gritty, kind of nasty town. Okay. I remember when I asked my hosts, the university that had invited me to speak there, what can a young professor do here that's fun? And they said, oh, well, we've got the Eastman School of Music, which is some classical music. I said, well,
that doesn't sound too fun.
That's not going to take me very far in life. And so I'm like, okay, I'm out of here. Let me go back to Montreal. But I mean, in a sense, it was a difficult decision because the starting salary that I was being offered in Montreal was almost half as much as what I would have made there. But I was willing to take that hit, at least to be back in my hometown. My family was here, and it's a lot more cosmopolitan here, and so I came back to Montreal. Yeah.
And you come back at what, 30?
29, and then that fall I turned 30.
And straight then to being a professor?
Straight being a professor. So for the viewers who don't know, being a professor is, people might think they know what it is, but it really, I mean, there's three elements to being a professor. There is, of course, the teaching, but the teaching is actually a small part, a very, very small part of what it is to be a professor. The main part is the research. You have to publish a lot. You have to...
Oh, so you're not just teaching people, you have to continually publish academic works.
You have to continuously publish academic works, so much so that after a few years...
But publish the studies.
Publish the studies, exactly.
Okay.
Or in some fields you can also publish books. In other fields it has to be just papers in peer-reviewed journals.
Okay.
And so that at the end of a certain number of years, you present a dossier to the tenure committee, and that dossier will be made up of how has your teaching been, were you a well-received teacher, how was your service, which committees did you serve on, and so on. But by far the most important part is what's your research profile. Which papers have you published, how often were they cited, which books have you written, which conferences have you presented at. So you put together this massive dossier of, you know, hundreds of pages long of all of your supporting documents. It goes in front of a committee, and then it goes through different layers of the university, and then they decide either they grant you tenure or they deny you tenure. If they grant you tenure, you usually get a promotion in your rank of a professor, and you're now secure that you can never be fired. In other words,
Okay, so you have to do a certain amount of work to be recognised, so then you get that guarantee. So people are working hard and hard and hard to get the guarantee that they can
put
never...
their head down, they're
Okay.
going at it, they're trying, and hence that's why you have the term publish or perish. You better publish a lot, or else you're going to be kicked out. If you're kicked out, if you're denied tenure, then you have 1 year left that you serve, and then you're out. So then you have to either apply to another university, or some people decide to leave academia. Of course, the likelihood of being granted tenure varies as a function of the prestige of the university, right? So in some universities, you better be Isaac Newton in order to be granted tenure. In other universities that are less prestigious, you might publish 2 or 3 papers, and that might be enough to get you through the threshold that they expect of tenure. So I got tenure, and so I became a professor in 1994. I went up for tenure in 1999. I got tenure, and that moved me from, so the first rank of a professor is called assistant professor. This doesn't mean you're an assistant to a professor, it's just the title of professor. The next rank is called associate professor, and then the final rank is called full professor. So I got full professor now, also many years ago. And then even higher than that is what's called a chair full professor. This is usually where you get an endowment that allows you to do research. So let's suppose you're a very wealthy guy and you decide you want to fund an endowment at University of London. It's going to be called the Tommy Robinson Chair in Consumer Psychology. So you give $3 million, and then that endowment generates some money, and then if I get appointed to the Tommy Robinson Chair in Consumer Psychology, I hold that chair, so I get the money that flows out of that endowment to do my research. So that's the highest level. It's a chaired professor. So for example, Isaac Newton, I think, held the Lucasian Chair of Mathematics at Cambridge. And so I got all those, I did all that.
You got to a chair?
I got to a chair. I held the chair for 10 years, from 2008 to 2018. Then when it came to renewing that chair, and now I had really become very outspoken Gad Saad, suddenly that chair was never renewed again.
Okay, let's get on to how you become outspoken. Was you political in those early years at university?
I mean, I never refrained from speaking out, but my original forays into the public sphere at first was very much tied directly to my scientific work. But already there, I was already starting to see the parasitic ideas flourishing. How? Because it may or may not surprise you to know that for most social scientists, applying biology is basically you're a Nazi. Because for most social scientists, what makes us human is that we transcend our biology, right? Biology matters for the mosquito, biology matters for your dog, biology matters for the zebra. But how dare you say, Professor Saad, that biology matters for consumers? We're cultural animals, Professor. We transcend our biology. Bullshit, right? You don't escape your biology. So at first, I started seeing that there was a lot of blowback within academia to my work in evolutionary psychology, because the social scientists simply were not willing to accept, and even till today, many of them are not willing to accept, that the same mechanisms that explain how the salamander mates, or how the lion mates, or how the crow mates, is exactly the same principle that drives mate choice in the human context. I mean, evolution doesn't operate on every single species except one called humans, okay? So that's when I first started seeing, we've got a lot of parasitic bullshit going on in academia. So that was my first sort of, this is pissing me off. I mean, these are colleagues that should be smart, and they're buffoons. So that was my first sort of, let me start fighting all this nonsense. But then I quickly realized that those parasitic ideas were in every corner where I turned. So for example, postmodernism, right? Postmodernism purports that there are no absolute truths. Everything is subjective, everything is relative, right? And that's taught in every humanities department and in many of the social science field. Well, what do you mean there are no objective truths? Then how could you do science, right? Now, science recognizes that a truth is provisional. What we thought was true 300 years ago, in light of new incoming evidence, we revise it. Okay. So science is humble. It recognizes that you don't have it, only religion has revealed truths. It's the truth and you can never deviate. In science, we recognize that what we thought was true, we thought that the sun revolves around the earth. Okay. And then we suddenly fix it. But the church wasn't happy when Galileo was saying it, right? He didn't have tenure. And they said, you know, just because you're Galileo, we're not gonna burn you at the stake, but you're under house arrest. Stop saying this bullshit. And then people said, no, it's true. It's the earth that revolves around the sun. But we do recognize that there are real truths to be discovered, whereas postmodernism says there's no such thing. There's not a single absolute truth. Everything is relative. So then, in my entire 30-year career, it led me to then writing The Parasitic Mind, because then I said, my goodness, if people only knew some of the nonsense that I see every day within academia.
Why do you think there is that nonsense within academia? Why do you think? Do you think it's to do with people's own political beliefs as well?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I do address it in The Parasitic Mind. So I argue that what unites all of those parasitic ideas is originally a noble goal, which then metastasizes into killing the truth in the pursuit of that noble goal, right? So take, for example, feminism, okay? Equity feminism makes sense. Equity feminism says, hey, there should be no reason why men should make more money than women as an institutional, fiat, right? Men and women should be equal under the law. Well, by that definition of feminism, you and I would call ourselves feminists. Yeah, of course I believe that men and women should be treated equal under the law. Then radical feminists came along and said, well, it's not enough for us to argue that men and women should be equal under the law. We should argue that men and women are indistinguishable from each other, because then that would allow us to eradicate the sexist status quo. We should argue that anything that men desire to do should be no different than what women desires are. Ladies, burn your bras. If men want to have unattached, unemotional sex and they seek it, there's no reason why you shouldn't have that exact same desire. Now, women have also evolved the desire to have variety seeking in their sexual pursuits, but again, a three-day-old pigeon knows that the penchant for sexual variety seeking is not the same for men and women. As a matter of fact, studies have been done in 60+ societies that are very different from each other, and nothing could be clearer than the fact that there are certain incontestable differences between men and women when it comes to mating behavior.
What do you mean?
So for example, seeking variety in mates. So if you ask men, what is the average number of sexual partners in an ideal world you'd love to have? And you ask women the same question, there is no culture where women
want the same amount as men.
Now that
Women always want less.
Exactly. Now that doesn't mean that women don't desire sexual variety. It's not the prudish Victorian idea that women are these sweet little chaste flowers and only men are the Neanderthals. There are actually very good evolutionary explanations for why women are actually quite promiscuous in their sexual interests. But we certainly know that men and women are not indistinguishable from each other. Social constructivism, which is the idea that all differences are due to social construction, argues that no, any difference between men and women must have been because of sexist parental upbringing, it must be because of socialization and advertising, it must be because of the Hollywood images that you see in movies. None of it is due to innate differences. Now, the average person that you grew up with in Luton, who is smarter than most professors, would say, what kind of bullshit is this? But academics want to create a utopian world. I call it unicornia. So in the service of unicornia, if we have to murder and rape truth, so be it. So that explains the reason why all of those idiotic ideas flourish, because they come with this kind of utopian view of where
they're trying to get. And they're making their suit to get there.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Because even when we got onto COVID, I think one of the sage advisors in Britain, when you looked, was a communist, member of the Communist Party. So asking if they're actually basing it on science or basing it on their own politics.
And it is based on ideology and politics, right? By the way, speaking of communism, E.O. Wilson, he just recently passed away. He was a Harvard biologist who was specifically an expert on social ants. The reason why I'm telling that story, because I'm going to link it to communism in a second. Social ants have a unique social structure.
Social ants as in?
As in literally ants, right?
Yeah, go on.
Now, they're social ants in that they build communities, right? Yeah. That community is usually made up of a single reproductive queen and then an indistinguishable mass of worker and warrior ants that are all indistinguishable parts. There is a singular queen and all the rest of you are one mush, right? Why am I saying this? Because when E.O. Wilson was asked, Professor Wilson, what do you think about socialism/communism? He said, wonderful idea, wrong species. Beautiful, pithy statement. Why? What he's basically saying is, when you are trying to impose a political or economic system on humans, it has to be consistent with human nature. Humans are not social ants. Social ants are communists because we're all equal.
We want to be better.
Right. Some of us are taller, some of us are shorter, some of us are Lionel Messi, some of us are not. Some of us are intelligent, some of us are not. Some of us are ambitious, some of us are not. So now diversity, inclusion, equity comes along, one of the biggest cancers to the human spirit, and says, hey, anytime there is a difference in outcomes, it can't be because humans are heterogeneous beings.
Or because of race. Or...
It's because of race, because of transphobia, because of Islamophobia, because of indigenous, because of bullshit, and so on. Therefore, we will institute mechanisms to create equality. Because remember, we're not human beings, we're worker ants. So you're exactly right that many of these ideas evolve and flourish out of academia because of the ideological rapture of the professors.
Because I see a statistic in the UK, 90% of the professors at universities are on the left.
Oh, absolutely. So
is that a march through the institutions? Would you say that the people have got into those positions of academia in order to have an influence?
Oh, I think you're being charitable in saying it's 90%.
Okay.
So I actually cite several studies in the parasitic mind where the studies specifically look at the political orientation of professors. And in some fields, you couldn't make up data like this. So it'll be... So across all disciplines, it might be about 10 to 1.
Okay.
But that actually understates the problem. Because in fields like engineering or the business school, these are disciplines that are wedded to reality, right? You can't build a bridge using postmodernist physics, because the bridge will collapse. You can't build a model of the economy using postmodernist economics because the economy will, right? So because some disciplines are more wedded to reality, they're less parasitized, and therefore there is a bit of a more equitable political orientation across the professors. But I say equitable because even in those fields, it'll be a lot more to the left than to the right. But now as you go down the disciplines and you get to the more activist disciplines, you're talking about 138 to 0, 120 to 1.
As in 138 left-wing professors to 0
Exactly.
on the right.
So in other words,
and they're in professorships where they're teaching the next generation.
Exactly, and they're teaching the next generations in domains where it would make pedagogic sense that you hear both sides of the story, right?
So they should be getting the left and the right, but they're just getting the left.
Exactly. Now, in some disciplines, if you're teaching evolutionary psychology, there is no left or right. I'm going to teach you the evolutionary principles that led to why men exhibit sexual territoriality. There is no left-right. But in other disciplines,
you have to have left and right.
Fiscal policy, immigration policy, is the death penalty moral or not? Well, there are compelling arguments on both sides of the equation. And if I am someone who is teaching the next generations of politicians, maybe I want to hear both sides of the equation so I can really start forming an opinion as to whether the death penalty is moral or not, whether there should be open borders or not. But there isn't such a thing. So therefore, what do you get? You get almost 100% ideological rapture from the professors, who then walk into class, they exhibit zero epistemic humility, right? This is an opportunity. So that means being humble about what you know and what you don't know,
they're just pushing.
I've got an opportunity to brainwash these next generation of idiots. Let me use the pulpit to do that. And therefore, let me teach them that socialism is great. Let me teach them that whiteness is evil, the patriarchy, men are toxic, and so on. So then what do you expect the future generation of politicians to be? They're called Justin Trudeau, right? I don't think Justin Trudeau was born, maybe I'm being charitable, but was born dispositionally evil. But he is an exact product
of the education system.
So he literally is a walking manifestation of every parasitic idea that I discuss in the parasitic mind. He just apes it. He's a zombie. He's the wood cricket who's been zombified.
So in your 30 years of education in universities, would you say it's education or indoctrination? In what you've witnessed as a professor and your fellow colleagues, are they educating or are they indoctrinating?
So because I'm housed in the business school, because I teach things like consumer psychology and evolutionary psychology and psychology of decision making, I don't see it with my students. And by the way, I'm very disciplined as a professor in that I never bring in my outside public intellectual activities into the classroom. In other words, I don't go on a tirade against the policies of Justin Trudeau if I'm teaching evolutionary psychology. Therefore, you can't come after me saying that I am indoctrinating you, because I recognize that you signed up to learn about evolutionary psychology with me, and that's what I mean by being humble. Right? Yeah. I have this privilege to be able to be training students how to think, not what to think. So I'll teach you about the scientific method. I'll teach you about how to conduct statistical analyses to understand data, to make better consumer decisions and so on. I won't indoctrinate you. Now, do other people do it? Not so much at the business school. Again, because teaching finance is teaching finance.
It's very different. Yeah. There's no ideological push on that.
Exactly. But
the other people who have got into the positions of teaching that, then they can.
All bets are off.
And they are.
And they are, absolutely.
Which we're seeing the consequence of now.
Exactly.
And how has university changed? If you've been in the university for 30 years, how has it changed from when you started to where we're at now? Where are we at now?
Oh, wow, what a great question. It is so bad that you couldn't find a more prototypical professor than me. It's in my DNA.
What's that mean,
an exemplar of somebody who's always was meant to be a professor. Okay. Remember earlier I said I've only wanted to be two things. Soccer player,
you knew from a child.
I knew as a child. And now I'm thinking, I still have a long way to go, knock on wood, if I wanted to stay in academia, and I'm feeling like it's time for me to leave because it's so painful to be in academia. So let me give you concrete examples of that.
Yeah.
So usually when you want to do research, you will apply for research grants. There are many different sources for how you can get that money, but the typical grantor will be the government. So there are programs set up, pools of money, that if I want to do studying how do hormones affect economic decision making, I'll put together this big grant. Over the next 5 years, I need $400,000. Here are the reasons why I need it, and so on. And then hopefully I win that amount. And I now have $400,000 for the next 5 years to do this research. I can hire doctoral students, I can hire a postdoc, I can hire undergrads, we can run these studies and so on. Well, a few years ago, the Canadian government decided, and my university and all other universities, that you have to write I call it a DIE statement. I don't do DEI, I don't do diversity, inclusion, equity. I do diversity, inclusion, equity. So it's the acronym is DIE. Because that's where meritocracy and excellence go to DIE, exactly. So you have to, as part of you
to get that grant, you've got to fit in with this ideology.
How can I write a book called Parasitic Mind where I rail against the cancer of diversity, inclusion, equity, and then when no one is looking, so from this side of the mouth, I'll say that DIE is a cancer, but then from this side of my mouth, when nobody's looking, I'll play along, then I would be a false person. Then I'll be inauthentic. So guess what I've done, Tommy? I've stopped applying for grants.
Because you wouldn't get the grants unless you were sticking to their ideology.
Here's my. You want me to tell you what my DIE statement is? DIE statement is a cancer that is an affront to human dignity. Please give me $400,000.
Explain what DIE is. So someone sitting here, diversity includes. Just explain what that ideology is. What that's being pushed across the West.
So it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is if there are differences in outcomes, those differences are inherently due to nefarious reasons, to bad things that happen.
Racism.
Right? So why aren't there as many indigenous people studying mathematics? Canada is systematically keeping down indigenous people from studying mathematics. Therefore, your benevolent government, must come in and make sure, let me see the count, there needs to be at least 73 professors who are indigenous, right? Oh, how come there aren't enough black? There must be that. Why aren't there enough transgender? How come there isn't a single transgender person of color who's a neuroscientist at Concordia? Oh, that must be a problem. So diversity, inclusion, and equity is the noble framework that tries to redress those wrongs.
Which is where people are being promoted based on their race or sexual religion, when not on their work ethic.
Yeah? So if you remember earlier when I said when you apply for tenure, you have a dossier of 300 pages long that doesn't say what my sexual orientation is, that doesn't say what my skin hue is, that doesn't say where I stand on LGBTQ. It says, here is what I've done. Judge me on my merits. Well, now we don't longer do that. Now, the top universities in Canada, and by the way, you would think that those are satirical pieces that God Saad is coming up with to take the piss out of people. University of Waterloo, which is a university that is very well known for its engineering and computer science. It's kind of like the MIT of Canada or the Caltech of Canada. Well, they recently had a call for a Canada Research Chaired Professor. So that's the highest possible chaired professorship because it's the Canadian government that is endowing that chair. So it's a very prestigious chair. It was for a chaired professorship in artificial intelligence, one of the fields of computer science. And it said that the people who apply for it must be non-binary, what's the other one? Transgender, or what's the other one? Two-spirit.
What's two-spirit?
Two-spirit means, so non-binary is I'm neither.
Yeah. Not man or woman.
Okay. Two-spirit is I've got elements of both male and female in me. So I'm not male, I'm not female, I'm a mélange of both, right? So it's non-binary, transgender. So imagine that the most elite engineering schools in Canada, with the most prestigious professorship in Canada, the endower being the Canadian government.
The only person who's getting that seat has got to fit in one of those brackets.
It's astounding, right? Now, I guarantee you that in 50 years, people will look back and say, how could this have ever come to be? What kind of ideological rapture was this? Or, of course, they'll pretend that it never happened.
Why is this dangerous?
It's a complete attack on the most foundational values that have made the West the great society that it is, right? It's individual dignity. It's individual merit. Why do we have a day called Martin Luther King Day? I mean, he didn't say something that was so astoundingly profound that, he said, remember the I have a dream?
Yep.
I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but one day I hope that
It'll be based
not on her skin color, my daughter, but based on her, right? That is now racist. That is literally anti-dying. If Martin Luther King were to write his I have a dream speech as his die statement when applying for a grant,
he wouldn't have got it.
He can't get it. He's a racist. So all this to say, you asked me what do I think of academia. So I have to walk around in this hotbed of bullshit while always now I am to a fault authentic and honest. Maybe that's why I became Gatsat, because I tell it like it is. But it's very hard to walk in that ecosystem and be the authentic guy that you are, because you're constantly being coerced into scamming. What do you mean giving? Now, this didn't happen at my university, but it happened at other universities where, there is reparative grading. Don't grade people based on what they got on their exam, because you owe them reparations, right? By the way, that's...
Oh, hold on. So at a university, there's grading where a white person could have a test, a black person could have a test, and what you're saying is that they could get equal marks, but a black person will get better marks.
Or, for example, you'll have, even at the entrance level...
They have a less of an entrance level to get into the university. They can not do as well in the exam.
Astoundingly lower level, right?
So they're lowering the level of acceptance just to match their rota figures of how many blacks or how many minorities they want.
Do you know who Amy Wax is?
No.
Amy Wax was trained as a neurologist, a brain physician. She decided, I don't want to do medicine, went back, got a law degree, became a professor of law at University of Pennsylvania, one of the 8 Ivy League schools. She's gotten into all kinds of trouble. She came on my show a few years ago because they were trying to cancel her because she said things like, well, I'm a law professor, right? I see the grades of the students, and consistently the black students are doing worse. It wasn't a racist, it was a statement of fact. Well, that was marginalizing, that was racist. She needs to be fired, right? In medical schools, we now have diversity, inclusion, equity, right? For example...
Which means the quality of the person doing the job is getting less and less, which then becomes a danger.
Less. Not only that, so now we have don't grade medical students because, it's very, very stressful to go to medical school. And if you're now going to create a competitive hierarchy,
it's racist.
It stresses them more. Because when I have a trauma surgeon who's going to operate on me, I want to make sure that he's a flower child and that he wasn't too scared during his medical training. So what diversity, inclusion, equity does is it takes all of the laudable traits that we valued until 15 minutes ago in the West, right? Honor, merit, excellence, and it abolishes them under the misguided unicornia view that we need to create equal social ends.
How do you stop that? How do we as a society, if we're looking at universities, and in fact, if you've got children,
Yes, I do.
If there's a parent here whose children are about to go to university, what advice would you give the kids? Because I always say now, parents used to be worried about their kids going to university and getting addicted to drugs or drinking too much alcohol. Yeah? Now I'd be worried about them coming out of university, chopping off their penis or removing their boobs. Yeah? Something big's gone on.
Yes.
What advice would you give for someone who spent 30 years in a university and seeing where we're at now?
That's a great question. There are many ways. So one of the things that you and I talked about when we met for coffee yesterday, you asked me, well, what's a honey badger? Yeah. And I explained to you that in chapter 8 of The Parasitic Mind, I have this kind of battle cry where I implore people to activate their inner honey badger. And so let me explain to maybe your British viewers who may not know what a honey badger is. A honey badger has been ranked as the fiercest animal in the animal kingdom. It's the size of about a small dog. It's a badger, but a honey badger is a particular type of badger.
Someone put it on the comment under your thing yesterday as well.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, under your comment, someone said about activate the honey badger.
Oh, great. So it's the size of a small dog, but it is so ferocious, so fierce, it stands so tall, despite the fact that it's the size of a small dog, that it lives in a very dangerous ecosystem, in a very dangerous neighborhood with hyenas and with leopards and with lions, and yet lions will go to the other side of the street when they see the honey badger. Why? Because it is ferocious. So when I tell people activate your inner honey badger, I'm asking them to be ideologically committed in defending their principles. So to your question, if you are a parent and you know that at the school they're teaching that, of course, girls can have penises. Well, that's just a biological fact that girls can have penises. Well, then maybe you want to get engaged. Maybe instead of saying, well, let Gad Saad serve as our spokesperson. He's got big shoulders. He's a courageous guy. He's a cool guy. He'll handle it for us. No, we all have a stake in the game. Some of us have bigger platforms. Some of us have fancier titles. But all of us can affect change within the small sphere of influence of our lives. If your professor says something that's insane, challenge them politely. Don't say, but if I challenge them, I might get a lower grade. You know, the guys who landed on Normandy, we recently celebrated it, they were all 18 and 19 years old. They knew that most of them were going to be mowed down like little mosquitoes, and yet they all said, yeah, sign me up. So if they're able to sign up for that, surely you can muster the courage to say, hey, professor, really? Women can have 9-inch penises? Can you explain that to me using simple words? Right? But
is it safe? Is it safe within the university for pupils to challenge that now? Do we have that system of freedom of speech within the universities for these discussions?
I mean, it depends on the classroom. In some classes, the professors will be unethical and will say, you better not say that or else I'll grade you down. But I'd like to think that there is still enough honorable people, whether it be in politics or in business or in universities, that if we can activate the courage of the silent majority, then we'll quickly realize that the crazy folks are actually in the minority. But the minority are the ones that have the loud voices. The minority are the ones that do the encampments. The minority are the ones that call death to Jews. Eventually they'll become the minority, by the way, and then you would have lost the window of opportunity. But today, the numbers are such that if I look at my emails, I receive 1 million emails, and let me summarize for you what every email is. You ready?
Yep.
And it's going to show you how that's the problem. Dear Professor Saad, bunch of compliments, last sentence. But if you decide to read my email on your show,
please keep my name out.
Please keep my name out.
My name.
And therefore I write back, dear so-and-so.
Yeah.
Thank you for the lovely words. Don't you think that the last sentence of your email is exactly why we are here?
Yeah, how do you, because exactly that is my direct messages. My direct message is exactly the same. And in the sense, so you walk the street, as we walked the street yesterday, lots of people were complimenting you.
Yeah.
Yeah? Just in one,
everywhere, yeah.
In one little bit.
Yeah.
So there was no animosity,
no.
There was thanking. People were thanking you.
Yeah.
Why are they thanking you?
Because I'm exhibiting the courage that they're unwilling to exhibit. I mean, of course, there are things coming out of my mouth or that I'm writing that is unique to me. But I think probably the thing that impresses people the most is that you have the testicular fortitude, the courage to stand up and say what everybody behind you is thinking but is unwilling to say. Look, there's always some valid reason for why you shouldn't take risks, right? And let me contextualize it within academia, okay? If you're a young professor who's not yet tenured, you will write to me and say,
I have to wait.
I have to wait until I get tenure. When you get tenure, you then write to me and say, well, I'd like to apply for full professor, so I've got to wait. But when you get full professor, you know, I'm thinking of going for a chair professor. Once I get that and I'm 73, that's when I'll let it.
Too late.
I might be in the short running for a prize, even though I'm chair professor. So there's always some castrated, cowardly reason why you shouldn't take the risk and why Saad should take all. And when I say Saad, I don't mean just me. I mean also Tommy Robbins. I mean all the people who have the courage to do it, right? And so, no, I'm not sympathetic to your reason for why you shouldn't. So people write to me, for example, someone who's got a conscience will write to me and say, am I a coward for not writing what I truly think on my paper because I just want to get a good grade? And my answer is, dear so-and-so, yes, you are a coward.
But do you, okay, in that sense, do you see where there's been the fear element has been installed in everybody, even if you just look at the truck, we're in Canada.
Yeah.
Look at what happened with the truckers, yeah?
Yes.
They weren't cowards. They stood up. What happened to them?
Yes.
Can you tell the story to people who weren't aware during COVID? I'd like your opinion on COVID as well, but do you understand? So even if I talk about myself here, I used a fake name, and I wore a mask because I was a coward, because I didn't want to be the person sitting here. I didn't want to be the person who...
If you're a coward,
no, I was.
then we're doomed.
What I'm saying to people is, I was you, So the people who wasn't speaking out, I was that person.
Okay.
The people who didn't want to speak out, I was that person. I was scared to speak out. That's why I used a fake name. I used a fake name and wore a mask because I was scared. And I had a legitimate reason to be scared. So all these people, because it's a struggle, because
I get it.
Because they are going to lose their job. They are going to, and if you're a man who's working hard in Canada, are you free to just say your opinion, or do you have a high mortgage? Do you have 2 reliant kids on you? And are you going to put that in jeopardy by speaking out?
I got you.
Yeah.
So let me backtrack. So I don't want to make it sound as though I'm unsympathetic to real concern.
But how do we get them to talk?
Right. Yeah. So then modulate your risk, right? So here I'm going to go to a topic that I covered in my book after Parasitic Mind, which was a book on happiness. So in that book, I have a chapter on what I call the inverted U. The inverted U basically means too little of something is not good, too much of something is not good, and the sweet spot is in the middle. And one of the most famous philosophers to ever espouse that idea was none other than Aristotle. He talked about the golden mean, and so you're going to see how I'm going to link it to what we're talking about in a second. So he said, look, as a soldier, a warrior, if he is cowardly and therefore he hides behind the bushes, that's not good. If he is completely reckless in his bravery and gets killed in 4 seconds, then so you see where I'm going with this, right? Good. So no one is saying that be a completely unmitigated, uncalculated risk taker. But even within whatever real concerns you have, you can still contribute to the battle.
Yeah. So everyone has a role to play.
Right. You go to the pub with your buddies,
talk,
and they're starting to say bullshit. Challenge them. Your boss is not there. Your professor is not there to give you a bad grade. But then there, by the way, you know what the answer will be? But then I'm afraid that they'll unfriend me. So that's my point, is that there is always a viable reason for why it shouldn't be you who speaks, right? And that's called the diffusion of responsibility in psychology, right? So oftentimes when you see someone being accosted and attacked, the likelihood of someone intervening decreases the more people there are around. You would think it's the opposite, right? The more people that there are around, the greater likelihood that somebody will come. No, the more people there are around, the more we can each diffuse the responsibility. Well, I'm not going to go into the dark alley to save her because there's another 10 really courageous guys that will go. I think Tommy will go. He's a fighter. I won't do it. And if there's 50 other Tommy-looking guys, well, let them worry about it. So it's a very easy psychological trap to fall into for us to say, let someone, I really have real concern. Look, why don't I share the names of my children or where? So I'm also doing what you're doing. Is it that I'm being coward? No.
Calculated.
But here's what I'm unwilling to do. When I go to sleep at night, okay, the only thing that allows me to fight against insomnia is to know that that day I behaved in an authentic and non-cowardly way. Otherwise,
you're happy with yourself.
I'm happy with myself. So there is a calculus at the end of the day that says, was I Saad? Yes, go to sleep. If I modulate what I am then now maybe that's too exacting and too punishing of a code of personal conduct. Maybe I should relax it. But guess what? You are Tommy Robinson because you probably have the same code
I've
of
got this
conduct.
coming up now. I've got this code of conduct coming up right now.
Yeah, go
I've
ahead.
got a court case coming up for a film I made.
There you go.
And I do not want to bend on it because I won't be able to live with myself if I do.
There you go.
Just because I'll just think, no, if I go to jail for 9 months or if I go to jail for 2 years, I won't be happy going to jail in that prison cell for the 9 months if I've bent.
Exactly. So I don't, the fact that you
That's
wore the
psychology.
mask and the fact that you changed your name, to me doesn't in any way suggest that you are cowardly.
No, what-
It suggests
yeah.
that you live in the real world where you have to mitigate your risk.
What I mean is, how do we get? Because this all changes if everyone speaks. You know the letters you receive, the emails you
Yeah.
receive. When I've been to prison, I receive hundreds of them every day. If I look at my messages now, there's hundreds of them. So there's a massive feeling. I think we've just broke the back in London on June the 1st. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always said, you see the people who are whispering about these problems, people who come up to you in the street and say, I agree with you, but I can't say it. Yeah? Like, great that you're doing it. What will be the moment? Because people are whispering about. I said, when that turns and that bubble bursts, I think people are going to be screaming about it. Yeah.
Yes.
How do we get there? How do we get the person who's watching this now, who agrees with everything you say, who sees the society going down a dangerous path, who's worried about universities, who's worried about indoctrination? How do you get them to step out, to actually just start?
You keep doing exactly what we're doing here, right? I mean, you could have not come to see me in Montreal. I could have not taken the hours but guess what? Nothing is more important than us sitting here so that however many people listen to this, if 1, 2, 10, 50, 1,000, it's a battle of ideas, right? Normandy was a battle with machine guns. This is a battle for...
No one's asking you to go to war.
Say again?
No one's asking. I always say, no, we're not asking you to go to war.
That's right.
At the minute. Yeah?
Exactly.
In fact, we're trying to prevent that.
Exactly. So to your point about how do we get the people to wake up,
Yeah.
the people, I promise you, will wake up. The problem is when.
When, and if it's too late.
And if it's now, even when it's too late, it might still be reversed, but at great
Cost.
So we can resolve it yesterday and it would have been peaceful. Today a bit less peaceful. In a week a bit less peaceful. In 10 years it's Beirut civil war again. Now when I used to say this for now many decades, people would always say to me, oh, stop being so exaggerating, stop dramatizing, Professor, stop being so hyperbolic. Today they write to me and say, oh, you're right. Can I tell you a quick story exactly at that point? But somebody who's come around?
Yeah.
I mentioned this actually in the Parasitic Mind, where I talk about how Jews can be parasitized about the mortal dangers that faces them. So here's an example. This woman writes to me, this is around 2010. She says, we're friends, we know each other. She says,
Is she Jewish?
She's Jewish.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, her grandparents were, I don't know, I think they perished in the Holocaust.
Okay.
Or some of them, I don't know exactly how many. She writes to me an email and says, I've become very good friends with a student at McGill. We mentioned McGill earlier. She's a PhD student in Islamic studies, whatever. And she was telling me, God, that, oh, Islam loves the Jews. It's not true. It's a misrepresentation, all this bullshit. Well, you know your stuff about Islam. You're from the Middle East. Arabic is your mother tongue. What's the verdict? Tell me, what is it? Okay. So I thought, okay, that's great. She's reaching out to me to find out. So what I did, Tommy, is I shared with her, I think it's about a 22 minute montage of clips from across the Islamic world of things that people are saying about the Jews. It's largely imams.
Scholars.
But it could be the Islamic scholars, it could be the politicians, it could be the kindergarten cartoons that are being shown across the Middle East.
What they're showing in schools.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, stuff that is so bewildering in how genocidal it is that it would make Hitler and his friends go, oof, that seems like it's a bit too much Jew hatred for me. I mean, I'm Hitler, but this seems like it's way too much. Even I have limits. And look, I got Himmler next to me, I got Goebbels. Look at us, we're the Nazis, okay? So I sent her that with no editorializing, no... Okay.
Watch this.
What do you think she responds to me? Get ready.
Well, she don't want to accept it, like most people haven't wanted to accept it. Because you know why they don't want to accept it? Because if she accepts it, what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. So she writes back to me and says, wow, you seem to be no different in your extremism than they are. So
But by showing you it.
Exactly. So you asked me, you engaged me.
Yep.
I just shared a clip in their words.
Yep.
That makes me the extreme.
But this is how the whole of society has treated any of us talking about this
Absolutely.
for a decade.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, here's the good news.
She's come round.
About
After
2 months
after
ago,
October 7th. After watching 6 months of
exactly.
Okay.
She came back to me and said, "Oh, I don't know if you remember." "Oh, I remember. It's in the book."
Oh, you wrote about it. Okay.
But I didn't mention
Didn't name her. Yeah, of
I
course.
didn't
Yeah,
name
okay.
her. She goes, "You know, I now realize that I was probably not fair to you, and I now see what you mean." "Oh, you see what you mean because they're coming in the
now you're
jeeps to
seeing
take
it.
your daughter for the gang rape."
It's affecting you now.
Exactly. So diabetes doesn't exist because I don't have diabetes, and nobody in my family has diabetes. So diabetes is not real. But once diabetes hits my family, then it becomes real, right? So the problem is that, regrettably, the architecture of the human mind is constructed in such a way that it will find every possible means to ignore the problem until it literally has taken a chunk out of your ass. At that point, then I wake up and go, "Oh, my buttocks feel a bit lighter," right? But until then, I don't see it, right?
But they're all seeing it now.
They're all seeing it. I hope it's not too late, but demography is destiny, Tommy.
And what is the demography for Canada? What's the demography for the West?
Horrifying.
How horrifying?
So-
because how horrifying?
So,
And what can you do about the demography?
So let me first mention just a fertility statement and the demographic statement. On average, across the West, the replacement fertility rate is 2.17. In other words, in order for you to just maintain your population at zero, to make up for the dead, is you need to have 2.17 children.
We're having 1.3.
We're basically an asexual. There's no sex.
Yep.
Okay, so if nothing else changed, I'm not talking now about Islam, you're going down.
Yep.
Okay, now you have
They use this as justification for immigration
exactly
to keep the money bubble there as well.
exactly. So the Islamists have long said, I mean, literally they advertise it from the top of the mountain. We are, and whoever is listening to this, memorize this. We are. I'm speaking now as an Islamist.
Yep.
We are going to conquer the West through three means. We're going to conquer the West through the womb of our women.
Gaddafi said that.
Thank you. We are going to conquer the West through hijrah. Hijrah is the Arabic word for migration.
Yep. So would you say some migration and the immigration we're seeing is to do with their wanting to conquer areas, not just.
Absolutely, and I'll come back to that.
Yep.
And number three, we're going to conquer the West by using your miserable freedoms against you.
And we'll use your democracy to end your democracy.
We'll use your democracy.
We'll use your free speech to.
When we are the victim, when we are the minority, we whine victimhood all day. When we are the majority,
There'll be no
at the neck.
There'll be no minority rights for you.
Now, to your earlier point about conquering, this I think you would know, given your work. Maybe some of your followers don't. Islam is binary in the way that it views the world. There are two camps in Islam.
House of war, house of God. Outer Arab, outer Islam.
Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam. Harb in Arabic means war. Dar is the house, the salon. Okay?
And so people understand this isn't you putting it into two worlds.
No, this is
Islam. Islam separates the world in two.
Exactly.
House of war, house of God. Yeah.
The house of Islam is any land that is now ruled by Islam. So, for example, currently the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, is made up of 56 countries plus the Palestinian territory. So that's called the 57. Okay, that's the OIC. That's House of Islam. Okay, everything else is under the House of War, and that needs to be brought under the unifying flag of Allah, the House of God. Okay, now there's another point to be made here. Any territory that was once Islamic,
Spain,
Andalusia, right? What do Islamic jihadists say? Inshallah, we will reconquer, because
They have to. They have to.
Once it has been ruled by Islam, by godly decree, that land no longer belongs to those filthy Christian Spaniards. So that has to go back to Islam. So now let's link it to the Middle East. Israel's got nothing. It's got nothing to do with some Zionists from Hungary and Poland coming and taking over this beautiful land where all the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims live together. It is an existential doctrine issue. There cannot be a Jewish presence, a sovereign nation called Jewish land. It is a cancer.
Because they've conquered it once, it's theirs.
Canonically, it's written here. I can go to the book. It cannot be. So it's not a fight between these little territories and where we draw. There's no Islam. There's no Judaism. It cannot be. Now, we can tolerate you, potentially. There was a time where there were Jews living in Palestine, right? But at best, we will tolerate you. But you having your own dignity, you being more powerful than us, that's an affront to every single thing that is taught in my holy book. It cannot be. It cannot stand.
And on the Israel issue, since October 7th, have you, like this lady who's contacted you, that's caused an awakening? I've witnessed, I keep calling it a mass awakening of the public, of people who hated me. The amount of messages I get saying, I hated you. I was told to hate you. Media told me to hate you. I hated you. Now I look at you and I listen to you and I think, well, you were right, yeah? Do you see that? Are you hearing that? Are people...
Yes.
So to give people some encouragement,
Yes.
as well, are you optimistic for the future, or are you in a position where you think we're in real danger?
Well, that's a great question. I have to be optimistic, otherwise it'll be impossible to get out of bed, right? So then what's the point of doing anything? Why are we having this chat? It's all dead, right? Yep. So I do believe that it can be turned around. But regrettably, I say this again not to violate your desire to have optimism, but I feel that the West is still unwilling to look in the mirror and implement the changes that will be required to turn this ship around. And about 2 or 3 weeks after October 7th, I put out a tweet that, to my surprise, went really viral. I don't know how many.
What was it?
15, 20 million. Where basically I was saying, I actually think that if we continue on this path, it's irrevocable. It's pancreatic cancer stage 4, it's death. And the reason why I said that is because I said, look, every problem, we always hear the cliche, the first step in solving a problem is to recognize that you have a problem so that you can then develop a strategy to solve the problem. Now imagine if you go to see your physician and he says you've got cancer, and then your answer is, well, there is no such thing as cancer, and if there is cancer, it's a Zionist plot, and if there is a real cancer and there is a cure, probably the Jews are withholding the cure, right? Well, then you're gonna die of cancer. Well, what the West, now, I agree that there is an awakening. I don't know if the current awakening is enough to turn the ship around. In other words, it's going to take a truly cataclysmic change in order to turn it around. So in the grand scheme, I'm optimistic in that there still is a solution. I'm not confident that the West has the stomach to implement those solutions.
Have you been surprised? Have you personally, even though everything you know, been surprised by the level of hate in the West, in universities, on the streets since October 7th?
I have. And for me to say I have...
When you're already aware of the problem.
When I'm already aware, when I have my own personal history with Jew hatred. As a matter of fact, what has amazed me is the varied sources from which the Jew hatred is coming. So historically, okay, I can rest assured that Muhammad and Mustafa are going to send me the Jew-hating stuff. But it's not just the Islamic guys that are sending it to me. The academic progressive left is also sending it to me, right? So
do you think that surprised a lot of Jews?
It has, and some of them are awakening, because, by the way, a lot of the progressive academics are Jewish.
Yeah.
So they were part of the parasitized thinking. And then the third group, so there's the Islam folks, the academic left, progressive folks, and then the Jews won't replace us kind of neo-Nazi types. Now they've all banded in deciding that I am the architect of the genocide in Gaza. And so this kind of hate I get is simply just bewildering, right? I mean, yes, I can use humor and satire, but I think I'm very measured. I distinguish between individual Muslims and Islam. I'm very professorial, and yet I am, I'm a rat, I'm a vermin, I'm poison.
And this is what you're personally getting called.
All the time.
And you've said nothing that's...
Nothing.
You've just stated...
I just state facts. I share literally facts, which you could look at those facts and say, here's where you're wrong, here's where you're right? By the way, to give you a sense of the type of orgiastic Jew hatred that I get. So and this will resonate with you because you come from that world. So I shared a screenshot of one of the grooming gangs that was caught in Huddersfield.
Okay.
Huddersfield.
That's the one I went jail for.
Okay, so that's, no one should be hearing this more than you. So I shared it.
All the images of their faces, yeah?
All their faces
28
and their names. Here's their
names, yeah.
Muhammad.
30% of them are called Mohammed, which is a national statistic anyway.
No, that's just named Muhammad, but more than 30% are from the noble.
90% are from followers of Islam, 90%.
Of the Huddersfield only, right?
90% of all of them.
Of all grooming gangs.
Grooming gangs.
Yeah, I actually thought it would have been a bit higher, but okay, let's go with 90%.
Yeah.
So I shared that, and in my usual sarcasm, I said, I'm not smart enough to be able to see a unifying theme across these 20 guys. Could somebody who's got big data analytic brain help out this poor dumb professor to try to see what it is?
Okay.
Guess what the answer I got?
What?
Who's the cause of all the grooming gangs?
The Jews.
Why?
Because they're bringing them in.
Yes!
The Jews, because they're bringing them in.
That's why he's Tommy Robinson.
Because I get this.
Okay.
I get this all the time.
So
I get that most of my hatred now is because I'm a Zionist race traitor. Me.
Exactly.
So the hatred, not even from the Muslims, it's not coming from the Muslims anymore towards me.
Exactly.
I'm the race traitor. I'm the race traitor who refuses to talk about the facilitator.
Exactly. So I created a new mathematical equation. It's beautiful. So when 3 Muhammads gang rape your daughter, the real rapist is Mordechai. So the equation is Muhammad plus Muhammad plus Muhammad equals Mordechai. Beautiful social justice equation, new form of mathematics. So when I can't get the father or the prototypical father of a raped girl to direct his ire to the people who raped his daughter, but that he really needs to target it to the real rapist, who's the Jew, how can the West be saved?
Yeah, but I don't think any of the fathers or any of the British public per se. I think that a very vocal minority are the ones who are saying this.
But do you
minority.
But do you think it's a big enough of a cognitive trap?
Well, they've all come together now. Okay. They've all come together very vocally, and even as we're talking about on X with Elon Musk. Do you know why I was deleted from Twitter in 2017?
Why?
My statement said 90% of grooming gang convictions are Muslim males and 30% are called Mohammed. Fact. That statement come from a report from a Muslim think tank. Yeah? That was my reason for them removing me for hate speech. So facts in 2017 had become hate speech. Thankfully I'm back. Thankfully I was given my account back.
Well, I saw yesterday, you're too modest to say it publicly, but I saw your analytics.
It's insane.
And I thought that my analytics were impressive and you dwarfed them. Man,
do you know what that shows? That there's a need for this conversation, that the public are desperate for this conversation, that the public, that we as a society have to have this conversation. Because as I said, since my censorship certainly, I'd become a voice, or we'd have become and I'd say a symbol. So it's not essentially when people chant the name Tom Robinson, it's not about an individual called Tom Robinson, it's about a movement of people who feel voiceless, who are desperate for someone to have this conversation and say the things that need to be said, because they're desperately seeing their culture and their country disappear before their eyes, and with little hope. But essentially, anyone who has this conversation was censored or silenced and attacked under hate speech, attacked as hate figures.
Yeah, boy, it must have felt liberating once you were able to get back your voice.
Oh, well, essentially, yeah, massively. I felt like I was down and someone just picked me up and said, go on, there you go. And I just haven't looked back for 6 months, every day, bang, let's go. But when I say let's go, it's because what do you see to some people? Because I had this conversation years ago, 13 years ago, to my now ex-wife, to say to her, the consequence is so terrifying. I can see where this goes, yeah? And I knew it 15 years ago. And I knew it because I grew up in Luton. So I know where this path takes this country, yeah? And that scares me. Not the threats, yeah? I've got 3 children, okay? I know where this goes. I know where this takes us, yeah? And now, as a professor in university, with the scenes we've seen in universities towards the average Jewish person or Israeli person or supporter of Israel, how do you feel about yourself? Yeah, because you're outspoken.
Yeah,
you've gained quite a reputation. In this field of being outspoken. Does that worry you?
Yes. So this
in 2024. Let's talk about Canada.
2024, Montreal, Canada.
Yep.
Look, my university has been colloquially called Gaza University for over 20 years. So it's not something that today was discovered post-October 7th. The dynamics at my university have been, that the writing has been on the wall for quite a while. Now, the average student can go about their business merrily without facing any trouble. But imagine if Jewish students who are anonymous, right? Nobody knows who they are.
Because they don't come out and say
they don't come out anything.
Which is a sad state of affairs.
Exactly. They are afraid to go to my university. As a matter of fact, a couple of months ago, I was speaking to a senior administrator on a Zoom call, and that person said to me, straight looking at my face on Zoom, that there is no such thing as Jew hatred at our university, which took me, I couldn't believe she was saying that. Well, about a month later, the president of my university was summoned in front of the Canadian Parliament as part of a testimony with 3 other presidents, where they each had to admit, including the president of my university, that there was massive Jew hatred at our university.
On the campuses.
So now, this past semester, I was fortunate enough to be on sabbatical leave. Sabbatical leave simply means that after every few years, a professor can put in an application to be absolved of their teaching duties so that they can just do research, write their next book, and so on. So I've been the last few months away from campus, so I didn't have to face that campus. But September is coming around, and I have to go back to teaching. And as a matter of fact, yesterday my wife and I were sitting and saying, well, what are we going to do? What's the strategy here? The previous semester, which would have been in fall 2023, when October 7th has just happened, I was still teaching. My wife was so concerned about my safety that she was coming to the courses with me. She would walk behind me so that there was never someone behind me.
Keep her eye on your back.
And I mean,
how sad.
You saw my wife.
Yeah.
She's not a 6'5" MMA fighter that looks intimidating.
Quite the opposite, actually.
Quite the opposite, actually. Rather feminine and beautiful and not very intimidating. Well, she would sit the last seat next to the door coming into the classroom to see who comes in. Now, does it make sense that a professor in the 21st century brings his lovely wife as their bodyguard in order
to keep an eye on them safety?
It's insane. And so I don't know what the solution is going to be for me. Frankly, and I don't mind saying it openly, we were looking at various escape strategies. It gives me great pain to say that because I would have loved to be able to continue my career here. I don't feel as though it is the tenable option over the long run.
And if this isn't tackled, say this isn't tackled, because no one's tackling it. We're seeing this in universities across the whole West, yeah? If this isn't tackled, what does a university look like in 5 years' time? When we see the screams of Allah Akbar and we see all this going on in the universities now, what is it going to be like? Will there be any Jews in university?
Not many. No, exactly. Look,
will Jewish parents be sending their kids to university? Will Jewish parents still be staying in Montreal? Will Jewish... Is this... And then because people aren't happy with Israel, many people want to talk out about Israel, is there a safe place for Jews to go as this grows and grows and grows, which is going to...
But the problem is, so you'll pick up and go somewhere else until the monster comes also there, right? So for example, I was approached by a university in Florida that wanted to hire me. And Florida certainly seems today more amenable to be safe. I mean, you could carry a gun in Florida. They're not as insane about their tolerance of all this stuff. So it'll give you a respite. But the endemic problem is still there. Is the West, whether it be Britain or Norway or Denmark or Canada or the US, is the West willing to stand up and say, look, all cultures are not equal? That doesn't make you a racist. Look, you and I are both human beings, but one of us is taller, one of us is more aggressive, one of us is kinder. There are differences between us. Same applies at the cultural level. Cultures are not the same. They're not interchangeable parts. Some cultures are defined by a certain level of acceptable aggression that in other cultures is viewed as negative, right? In Japan, it's a conformist society. In the West, it's an individual society. So the idea that all cultures should be equal and should be treated as though they're equal is an insane idea. By the way, it comes from a parasitic idea called cultural relativism. Who are you to judge whether other cultures cut off the clitorises of their 5-year-old daughters? That's racist. You have no right to say that. There are no absolute moral truths. Bigot. Okay? Well, that can't be. We have to inoculate people against these kinds of parasites. Yes, the West has historically had a set of beautiful ideas. There is a lot to be proud of in the West. Anybody is welcome to try to apply to be a member of the West as long as you don't violate a millimeter of our foundational values. The second that you violate 1 millimeter, your ass is back to Yemen before you could say Allahu Akbar.
Which is what needs to happen.
That's what needs to happen. So I'm not, I don't, people will write to me, oh, but my friend is Muslim, he's lovely. I don't need to be lectured about that. I have more Muslim friends than most people will ever meet by virtue of being from Lebanon. Right? I grew up playing soccer with nobody's questioning. There are very nice Jews, there are very nasty Jews. There are Jewish pedophiles, there are Jewish honorable people. That statement applies to every race and every grouping of people. We're talking about an ideology. Does Islam permit for the greater flourishing of individual liberties or not? If the answer is yes, then we need to turn everything into Islam. If the answer is no, then maybe we need to mitigate the influence of Islam in the West. It's as simple as that.
And do you see that happening? Which part?
If you want me to lie to your face, yes, I see optimism. There's going to be new change. Frankly, I don't.
What about the voting patterns in Europe recently? The recent voting patterns of Europe. What about Geert Wilders? What about Le Pen?
Yes, but are they? What are they going to simply stop mass immigration, or are they going to reverse some of the trends?
They need to de-Islamize.
Exactly. If they do the de-Islamization, then I think there is hope. Now, again, don't get me wrong, because people will write to me and say, but there was a period when Islam was the cradle of science and so on. No one is questioning that any grouping of
Was there, or did they take over cultures that already had the advancements of that?
That is historically true as well. I'm trying to be charitable here. Okay. But the reality is that Islam as an ideology has a certain set of tenets. Some of the tenets are totally harmless. They're spiritual tenets, and that's great. Other tenets are either congruent with Western liberal values or they're not, right? There's no other option, right? If they are incongruent, then it can't make sense that 20 minutes from here there could be an imam at the local mosque spewing stuff that would make your skin crawl. But it's allowed because it's religious freedom. We can't stop him. Well, what do you mean you can't stop him? There is a thing called sedition, right? Sedition is when you are spreading stuff that is treasonous to the society, right? Now, it doesn't somehow get a pass because it's a religion. So the minute that we lose our reflex to protect religion because it is gauche, it is inappropriate to criticize someone's religion, the minute that we recognize that nothing is off limits, then I think we could flip the script.
So my whole activism, I saw Islam as the biggest threat, yeah? Always. Then come about COVID. Then come about lockdowns. Right. Then come about vaccinations. Yes. Then I started looking and seeing a bigger enemy, or dangerous. What's your opinion from Saad in Canada? With what? Because look, I looked at the whole world watched what happened in Canada.
Yes.
Yeah? Where I think the Canadian truckers probably changed the narrative for the world at that time. I was sitting at home cheering them on. I think most of the people were. Everyone was waiting for someone to stand up, and that started here at that time. But what was your opinion with COVID when it happened, and your government's response?
I'm going to answer it by giving you an anecdote.
Cool.
Did you know that after most of the sort of world had opened up to COVID, we still had a night curfew in Quebec where you couldn't walk your dog after a certain time.
Like it goes away at a certain time.
Yeah. So let's try to see here if we understand this. So it's -20. You're living in a residential neighborhood. Now, it's -20, meaning that it's not like there is a BLM riot. Oh, where, by the way, if there's 100,000 people with BLM, you can't spread the COVID. That's just a fact of the virus. If you're progressive, you can't spread it to each other. Okay. So if I walk outside my house in a residential area, it's -20, there's nobody else in sight, and I need to have my dog do their business. There is an overlord that has said, past 8, you can't do that. Now, by the way, they quickly reversed that one. But that doesn't matter. The fact that you instituted it, that you put it in. So now, I don't, unlike other folks, and maybe yourself included, I don't think that the COVID thing came from a diabolical cabal of Davos guys that says, let's take, I think it's more fundamental than that. Human beings have historically been ruled by authoritarian
they taste the power and they want it.
Exactly.
Control, they need it.
So if you look at the buffet of histories that have, buffet of societies that have existed throughout history, the Western freedom is a small bleep on the radar of authoritarianism. Our default mode of government is control. And so all that happened in the West now is that there was a mechanism by which the natural reflex of the few feudal lords to take over, they said, aha, we can finally return to the natural order of things where we sit on top of the castle and we tell you what to do. So I don't think it's a concerted cabal in Switzerland with, Klaus, whatever.
Schwab.
I think it's the natural inclination is if I am leader, I'm gonna F your life. And now COVID, thank God, has given me that opportunity. Let's ride that train all the way to its culmination. So yes, I was concerned. I was frustrated. I lost, by the way, when Parasitic Mind came out, it was in October 2020.
Starve it.
In the middle of COVID. Now, I was fortunate enough to be able to promote the book through Zoom, but I ended up losing huge opportunities to go on gigantic shows who wanted me to
talk about the book.
To talk about the book, because Justin Trudeau had decided that I can't leave. So I'm with the truckers on this one.
And with the truckers, can we explain, the truckers, they literally had bank accounts seized?
They had their bank accounts, not only their bank accounts seized, if you had donated money to support the
cause. They took the money as well, didn't they? GoFundMe. Exactly. They just took the money.
Yeah, no, it's breathtaking.
It's communism.
And of course what Justin Trudeau did is he invoked the Emergencies Act.
Which has now been proven illegal.
Right, exactly. So it's mind-boggling.
Based on science, any of it as a scientist? Based on science, any of it?
Almost none of it. As a matter of fact, Fauci, as you know, has come out and said
Just made it all up. He just made it up.
But you know what?
You can't laugh. We laugh about it, but people had to miss their loved ones while they died. People were locked up. People are still ill from the consequences of it.
Well, and I was fortunate enough that even though I had to pivot in a very hard way to change all my courses to be on Zoom, my income was not taken from me.
Yeah.
What about the millions of people who lost their businesses? How are you paying them? So yes, my children could have had a better education were they not masked and were they not on Zoom and so on. But in comparison to all of the people who suffered during COVID, I came out pretty unscathed. I didn't lose my income. I was still able to be a professor. I was still teaching. Nothing really changed. If anything, I avoided traffic of having to go on campus. But think of the millions of people whose lives were entirely eradicated and no one has paid.
No one's faced consequence for it. In fact, Trudeau's been voted back in since then, no?
3 times.
since then? Like, what's going on with the public?
He's been through. So
What's going on?
Can I tell you? This is a. Do you have a small thing? You give me like a prop. And okay, let's take this one. So let's suppose that this is the cork of a wine bottle.
Yep.
There is an Arabic expression that says getting drunk simply by smelling the cork of the wine bottle. Now, what it means basically is that you are of such weak constituency that you don't actually need to drink the wine to get drunk. You just take a whiff and you're already drunk. Now, I apply that principle, and you'll see in a second how. So look, I'm gonna smell now the cork of Justin Trudeau. You ready?
Yep.
Oh, he's tall. He's got beautiful hair. He says some cute, empathetic stuff. He must be good. Now let me smell Donald Trump. You ready?
Yep.
He's disgusting. I hate him. He's a pig. He speaks in a Queen's way, brawling way. Now, why am I saying all this? Because people simply get drunk by the cork of the image of the politician. They don't do the hard work of saying, I love Justin Trudeau because of these 7 policies. As a matter of fact, I used to ask people,
why'd you love him?
I was so baffled that you couldn't see just what a gigantic schmuck he was, and the answer would be, well, frankly, it's because I love to smoke pot and he legalized pot. Frankly, it's because, I mean, he's gorgeous. By the way, I don't think he's gorgeous at all. As a matter of fact, do you know who Megyn Kelly is?
Yeah.
Megyn Kelly is a very high-profile journalist. We've become good friends. I've been on her show a few times. She's been on.
I was going to make the point that she's gorgeous.
She's gorgeous. The reason why I'm mentioning her is because when she came on my show and we were talking about our respective disdain for Justin Trudeau, she said something that made me even love her more. She said, what woman wants that guy on top of her? What woman wants, that guy can't handle in the bedroom or something. And I said, I love this woman because she's a real woman. She sees what masculinity is. She gets it. She assumes her femininity and appreciates a truly masculine man. You know who are the women who love Justin Trudeau? They were my middle-aged female professors, colleagues, who on my personal Facebook page were writing things that if it had been a male colleague of mine writing this about female politicians,
Year B class as a
hashtag me too, out, he's gone.
Yeah.
But they were able to say, my God, he's dreaming. I'm having nighttime emissions thinking about him. He is amazing. What an orgasm. Really? That's why you picked him? But now you didn't pick him only once. But by the way, I should mention, in a sense, it's unfair to say that Canadians picked him. Because of our parliamentary system, you have to
politicians pick him.
At no point did they, more than I think 39% voted for him. So the great majority.
And what percent of people actually vote as well?
So I don't know that number, but you're right.
It's going to be a minority.
It's going to be a minority.
Minority of a minority.
So that's one of the faults of a parliamentary system, is that even though you might have a great majority of people who don't like you, you can end up serving 3 mandates as prime minister.
Trump or Biden?
Until I just saw a poll yesterday where apparently now Biden is 2 points ahead.
What?
Yeah, it just came out. Now, of course.
Was it a CNN poll?
No. Actually, it was like a non-woke poll.
No.
So that really stopped me in my tracks, because if after all you're seeing.
And Biden gets back in, we're finished, we deserve to be finished. They ask if it's legitimate.
Of course, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of scamming and cheating and so on. But by the way, speaking of the inability of people to alter their decisions, I spoke last week in Toronto at a Jewish event. The organization is called Tafsik. And I started off by reading out, I had just seen this tweet. And so this wasn't going to be part of my lecture. In 2020, the difference in American Jews in voting for Biden versus Trump was 38 points higher for Biden.
No.
In 2024, so just remember the number 38.
Yep.
What is it? So it could be higher, lower, it could be the same. Which one is it?
It's going to be lower. It's going to be less people voting for Biden.
Yes.
By the same as the black community are all shifting towards Trump.
It's the exact same number, 38 points. So let me
So
re-summarize.
explain that, go on.
Okay. So in 2020,
Yep.
30% more Jews voted for Biden than Trump.
Okay.
Then 4 years happened,
Yep.
including October 7th.
Yep.
Any human being with a functioning brain takes in new information
Yep.
and then revises their position in light of incoming information.
And they haven't.
When it comes to Jews, the needle hasn't moved by a single %.
What?
Therefore, you deserve what you get.
Yeah, that's what people keep saying with the people who voted for it. So the Jewish vote hasn't changed?
Not 1%.
What?
The only thing that's changed, I think it was like 68 to 30, and now it's 61 to 23. So the percentages have like the same 38-point difference. By the way, I was recently asked.
But the black community's changed.
But I don't know. I don't know what makes the Jewish mind
community
somehow. I think somehow they're unable to extricate themselves from we are progressive, we are empathetic, we are tolerant. The Democrats, and of course they're not, but the Democrats are the party, they're the liberal, they're the progressive. By the way, I've had a lot of people in Canada tell me, I vote liberal because I'm a liberal person. I say, but okay.
But the Liberal Party aren't liberal.
Exactly. Are you aware that the Liberal Party is about as illiberal as you can get? No, but there's the word liberal in the title of the party.
Yeah.
I can't vote conservative. I'm not a conservative person. But that speaks to getting drunk by the court. Right? It's just a label, and I get drunk by the label. Because thinking is too hard for me. And therefore, I better just get drunk by smelling the court. I'm liberal, I vote liberal.
Because we've seen lots of the progressive Jewish groups in the hierarchy in the UK who would have condemned us, yeah, and would always have their pictures taken for diversity, which are out of touch, I'd say, with the mainstream Jewish population, because mainstream Jewish population are awake now in the UK, yeah? And those same groups, it's like after October 7th, it's like, well, where are the Muslims you were having your pictures taken with?
Yeah.
Like, they're marching down the road calling for the genocide of the Jews.
Right. So have those folks come around to you?
100%.
Oh, good.
Well, no, not those. No, not the hierarchy, because the hierarchy were the elitist groups within the Jewish community.
They don't want to be associated.
They don't want to be associated, but they're still so out of touch. So and essentially my arrest on November 26th, when I went to the anti-Semitism rally to report, I received an amazing reception from the Jewish community. Yeah, right. Everywhere I go from the Jewish community, the amount of support I've received since. But
it's the riffraff. It's not the elite.
Yeah, I'd say it's the mainstream Jews, not the elite, but the elite are the same as our elite. Yeah. Like whether they're Jewish elite or whether they're Boris Johnson elite, they're the elite, and they don't care about us anyway. So, or they're out of touch with the average community.
Exactly. Well, one thing that I take from a lot of your questions that you have this undying optimism, which I think you need to have, otherwise you wouldn't be able to do your work, right? Yeah,
I haven't. Well, look, maybe it's desperation rather than optimism. Maybe I'm just wanting it. Yeah. Maybe we keep wanting it. But no, I have that in the sense of I think my finger's on the pulse, and it has been for many years. And I didn't have that optimism 6 months ago. Yeah. I have that optimism now that people who hated me don't hate me. People who didn't want to listen to this debate are now listening in massive numbers. I think on our last one we had 900,000 people watching live. Yeah, 900,000 watching live. That's 1 million people who are. And I look back through. I think I went on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan. It was the most viewed show they've ever had. Yeah, the public need this debate. The public want these discussions. These public are desperate for someone to say what needs to be said. And all those people have been censored, and thankfully now there's a movement there's more commentators now having these discussions than ever before. Right. Than ever before. The commentators who used to condemn me are now sitting saying exactly what we were saying.
So you're getting invited to platforms in the past you would have never been invited?
No, people are associating me that wouldn't have, but certain people who would have condemned me are now sitting on TV and I'm watching them parrot what I was saying 10 years ago. Yeah? Right. But now they're allowed to say it. Yeah, they're allowed to say it, but we were far-right hooligans for saying the same. But I think and I can gauge by the reception I receive walking down the street, everywhere. Yeah, so I can see, well, the public are awake. The public are feeling this. Yeah. And again, I'm not optimistic that there's a solution without chaos. There's going to be chaos.
Regrettably, I agree with you.
But I'd rather the chaos be us trying to sort the problem out than October 7th situations across Europe and across the West.
How long do you think we are away from the October 7th across Europe?
Well, we were 2 weeks away from it last week in the UK when 3 Muslims were arrested with machine guns.
Right.
We've stopped many, many attacks. I think that you'll be able to rewind this when it happens. They're going to hit a school. They're going to hit a school. They're going to hit a school, probably a Jewish school.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. And they found plans, Muslim terrorists will stop the plans in London of Jewish schools. Yeah, they'll hit a school. And I keep saying, what will be the moment? There'll be a defining moment in history that changed the directions of our nation. In Northern Ireland, it was Bloody Sunday. That changed it. Something will happen in Europe. Who knows what it's going to be? Yeah? If it wasn't Ariana Grande concert when they blew up 25 children, yeah? If that wasn't enough, if Lee Rigby being beheaded on the street wasn't enough, and after each of these incidents, so Lee Rigby got beheaded on the street, a soldier was beheaded. Yeah? And this is where the lying, corrupt politicians come in. Yeah? A soldier was beheaded. The killer, Michael Adebolajo, handed 52 verses from the Quran to a woman in the street that he says forced him to do that attack. Yeah? The next day, Nick Clegg, who was a deputy prime minister, stood on TV and said, in the Quran it says, if you kill one man, you kill all of humanity. Yeah? That's what he said. But he didn't carry on reading. Obviously, anyone who knows the verse says, unless they cause mischief. What was the verse that Lee Rigby's killer handed over, that he says forced him to do it? It was that exact verse. And that exact verse was, from his opinion, Lee Rigby had been part of an invading British army into a Muslim land who had caused mischief. So, and it says if you cause mischief, you must be executed, have your hands and feet cut off. But our politicians, I think so many people now are waking up to the fact, since COVID, especially, COVID has helped massively. The lies of the media, the lies of the politicians, the lies of all of them, the open border immigration, which goes against the interests of the British public, the Canadian public, the chaos and the level of violence and ferocity that they're bringing in and importing into our countries. So, yeah, I am optimistic, but I'm optimistic that many more people are having these conversations. I'm optimistic when I sit and see many more discussions being had like this, because more free speech or more conversation on this issue is what's needed, without the labelling of racist or Islamophobe or extremist or hate preacher.
Did any of those insults ever get to you, or you just really go like this?
No, they got to me, yeah. No, they got to me in the sense of, I wear the hat proudly of being against Islamic ideology, yeah? Because if I walk down the street tomorrow and someone wants to kill me, my head's up. Yeah? When I spoke out against Black Lives Matter, as an ideology, as a Marxist ideology, I remember walking down the street because it blew up in the UK for me, and I remember seeing some black people look at me, and I remember seeing them look at me differently, and I thought, I'm not wearing that hat. I don't, because I'm brought up in a town where most of my best mates are black. Yeah, I don't care about black or white. But I was wearing that hat as being viewed by some.
Right.
But that's gone full 360 as well. So whereas I was hated for that little period of time, the black community have gone on to realise it was a Marxist scam. Yeah, it wasn't to do with black lives. The last thing it was to do with black lives. But did the names, I think it got to me in the sense of, with my kids, possibly same with you. Did it worry your children? It worries my children. Even I had my son message me this morning about jail again. So, or their worries, and then them at school and the people classing their dad as a racist, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Difficult for me to see if there was 30 kids in the class, my son's school, 29 were getting invited to a party. He never got invited, ever.
Oh my God.
And I see that and I think he's getting judged. And as a child, how has he dealt with that? So, but that's the reason that they bring these labels in, to make you toxic, to make people scared, to make people not want to associate with you. I think, again, we've gone through that now. The public don't care in the UK about the media. No one buys the media. No one cares what they say. I laugh sometimes. I mean, I think I've done our last demonstration. The Daily Mail ran a real negative article about us, and I was on stage and said, like, your article's had 68 shares. 900,000 people are watching. No one's reading your article anymore. Your monopoly of power has gone.
Yeah.
Your smear campaign has gone because there are so many citizen journalists now.
Well, I mean, that's why when Elon Musk bought Twitter,
he could be the biggest. This could be remembered as the biggest savior of freedom of speech in the West.
Very shortly after he bought it, I did a clip on my channel, on my show, where I basically argued that of all of the great entrepreneurial initiatives that he's taking, collectively, all of them together pale compared to what he did with X.
Yeah, for the future. Yeah, Yeah, give us back what has been taken that they want, and they're not there. Censorship isn't about stopping what I say or what you say. It's about stopping what they hear.
Exactly.
And Elon must give us back that platform.
Yeah. Hail to Elon.
100%. What's your opinion of Elon other than that?
Oh, I love him. I mean, we've actually gotten to know each other very well. We've met. He's invited me down to Austin. He's been a big supporter of my work and Parasitic Mind. So yeah, it's wonderful to have him on your side. And you know what was really nice about Elon, which people may not know, is we sit down together and there's no pretense. You would never. He doesn't act haughty. He's not. It's very personable. He's lovely in every possible way.
And for me, when I look at someone like Elon Musk, same as Donald Trump, I think he didn't need to do this. He was loved, yeah. So Elon Musk, he was loved, yeah. There was no negativity about him, really, yeah. Yeah. Now with doing this, he's opened himself up to facing a backlash or facing an onslaught of hate. Yeah. Which he didn't need to, and spent £44 billion to do it, but didn't need to do it.
Absolutely, and you know.
It's going to take people like that.
All of these guys, I think, are truly honey badgers, right? Because you can sense that, look, it affects all of us when we are reviled. And
who was his comment, fuck yourself, to?
Oh, I love that.
Who was it to?
The Disney.
The Disney, it was about Disney, yeah.
Oh, if it's not clear, go fuck
yourself. Yeah. To do with advertisement, because that's how they rule everyone. That's how they manage to censor everything, because they threaten the corporations from the top down, the ones controlling what we hear and see.
But that's what I think that's what makes him Elon Musk, right? Or any historical figure, right? But what makes somebody historic, right, is that they're not a fence sitter. They don't equivocate. They don't play both sides. But that's what politicians do, right? Christopher Hitchens, who hails from...
He was brilliant.
Right? I mean, this is a guy that it was such a thrill to listen to him. Even if in cases where you might have disagreed with some of his positions, Iraq war, yes, no, we can discuss. But boy, was he a honey badger. I mean, if you came to a debate with him, you better...
Douglas Murray?
Douglas Murray.
He's another one.
By the way, he was here. He was just here in Montreal.
I heard, yeah.
We were supposed to meet, and we didn't get a chance to meet, but Douglas Murray is another one. All of these guys share the same sort of immunity from caring about what people think. And they just forge forward, and that's why they become the figures that they become.
You've named a lot. How many books have you wrote, Gad?
5.
5. Can you tell us what the names of them and where people can get them?
Oh, thank you. So the first one was in 2007, The Evolutionary Bases of Consumption. This is a book explaining how you apply evolutionary psychology to consumer behavior. That was an academic book, so it's a bit more technical. My next book was an edited book called Evolutionary Psychology in the Business Sciences. Then I started writing more for the masses, for the lay people. So my next book in 2011 was called The Consuming Instinct: What Juicy Burgers, Ferraris, Pornography, and Gift-Giving Reveal About Human Nature. Then the next one was The Parasitic Mind: How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. That came out in 2020.
I think that's your most important one?
That's
because of the topic?
Yes, exactly. That's the one that's been an international bestseller. Wow. I think translated in 22 languages now, or something like around there. So yeah, that's been a big one. The next one was The Sad Truth About Happiness: 8 Secrets for Leading the Good Life, which came out last year. And then the next one is going to be Suicidal Empathy: How when empathy misfires, it results in the kinds of problems that we've been talking about.
And where can people buy all them? Amazon?
So you can all buy them on Amazon, and of course through my various publishers. My last 2 books were through Regnery, but all of the 5 books are on Amazon.
And finally, Gad, I've took up a lot of your time here. I've enjoyed the conversation. What is the future for Gad Saad?
The future for Gad Saad is...
and be honest.
Professionally?
Just in life. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it...
Well, God willing, it's very good. It's filled with purpose and meaning. It is seeing my children flourish and surpass their father. Any good dad or mom should always have the humility to say, not that you just want your children to grow up to be good people, you want them to be even better people than you. So hopefully I keep my fingers crossed for that, to continue having a beautiful marriage with my wife and being healthy and meeting interesting guys like Tommy Robinson.
And do you know what? I want to end it on actually, because Gad, you have, I said it earlier, you've aged like wine. Yeah? Remember we spoke 8 years ago, I dug the picture up, yeah? You look very well, okay? You look like you've had a massive improvement in your health and in your visibility, the way you look. How is that? Because if people are watching this that are feeling unhealthy or in a position at a low point in their life, what have you done?
One of the reasons why I wrote the happiness book is because whenever I would share some advice on life, people would take so much to it, including how I ended up losing. So
how much weight did you lose?
So my heaviest weight to my lightest weight, I'm now about 6-7 pounds more than my lightest, but still very much thinner. I lost 86 pounds.
What's 86 pounds in stone?
86 pounds in stone, so divided by 14. So maybe 7 stones.
Okay, that's a lot of weight.
Yeah. So
how?
So a few things. Number one, 90% of your weight is through this guy.
Oh yeah, I know,
right?
and I can't control it, bro. I'd rather train twice.
And about 10% is through exercise. So number one, I used COVID to turn it into a positive.
Is that when you started your...
Yeah, I mean, I started maybe a month or two earlier, but it's really, the bulk of it was through COVID. It's 15 to 1600 calories a day, but measured to the T.
I've had that this morning.
How was that done? My wife, who I call her my food Gestapo, she will keep track of every single...
No, she gave me 1600 calories in the morning yesterday.
I know, yesterday.
Oh, you were throwing cream cakes at me.
That's just Lebanese hospitality.
Okay.
So I would eat no more than 15 to 1600
measured weights.
15 to 20,000 steps a day, no matter what. Yeah,
every day.
Every day. It's been actually before even I started losing weight. It's been about 4 or 5 years. I do 15, 20,000 steps no matter what. It could be minus 20 outside. Now, it could be I do a stationary bike, it could be a treadmill, it could be a long walk, it could be anything. But at the end of the day, I have to certainly have reached between 15,000 to 20,000 steps.
Has that got easier? Does it get better? To someone who's sitting at home who hasn't walked in months or years?
Just start small steps. I know it sounds like cliche. Start 2,000 steps. Take a 10-minute walk. Just don't sit sedentary in your living room. And you know, 86.
And you do that every day without fail? Routine, every day.
Every single day, the totality of decisions you made results in only one of 3 outcomes to your weight. Yes? Your weight could either go up that day, it could stay the same, or it could go down. Yes? Now, let's suppose that I just make sure that every single day it's down. Now, it could be 0.00 down, right? But if every single day for 180 consecutive days that statement holds true, I'll get on the scale and I'll go, oh my God, I can't believe it, I lost 42 pounds. What I mean by that is it's also a psychological mindset. If you get on the scale and you say, how am I ever going to lose 50 pounds? It seems impossible. It will be impossible. But if you say it's actually just a daily battle, I need today to be thinner than yesterday, even if it's by 2 millimeters, and do that over enough days, you end up looking as gorgeous and svelte as I am.
And how much better do you feel? From that time, how much confidence does it give you? How much better do you feel? Or how much?
Huge. Not so much from a vanity perspective, to be honest with you, because I think had it been vanity, I would have never let it get out of control in the first place. Yes, it's great to be able to look good, for people to comment about your looks and so on. But the most important thing for me, and it may apply to your viewers or not, it was the psychological weight, the following way. I have health anxiety, meaning that I don't like to go do my physical every year because I'm always worried, what if it gives me some devastating news, right? So I'm always concerned about my weight. And I was thinking, well, I've got young children. I'm very overweight. My blood pressure is starting to creep up. For someone who is anxious about their health, what's the best way to remove that anxiety? Be thin, bring back your blood pressure. And so once I got rid of that, so that when I go see my physician and he does my blood pressure, and now it's like that of a 12-year-old, then that's the weight that I think I have most benefit from, more than the size of my waist.
Yeah. Dad, it's been very enjoyable, and it's been an absolute honour as well to meet you.
It's so good to talk to you.
I wish you luck.
So much. Cheers.
Thank you, Dad. Cheers.
Oh, that was good.
If you're watching that, we're still censored on most places. Like it, share it, and give Gad a follow at, what's your Twitter?
At Gad, G-A-D-S-A-A-D.
We'll share on there.
Cheers.
Cheers, man. Thanks, bro. Carry on watching for more interesting guests. I'll talk to anyone. I'll debate anyone. I'll hear anyone's story. If you want to help me along that way, it's not free. I need your support. If you can support my family, that gives me my peace of mind. It means I can continue to do the work I do. I appreciate every bit of support, as do my children. It gives me the ability to fly them out here to see me so I can stay in constant contact with them. I'm deplatformed and I'm censored, so I need you. I need you to share this content and make sure you stay tuned for upcoming weekly guests, interesting guests, exciting guests. I'm Tom Robson and this has been my podcast, Silenced.